Chapter 619. After understanding the infinite information and memories, a faint smile gradually appeared on Luo Fan's face. The integration of these information and memories allowed Luo Fan to instantly regain all the feelings of that spiritual sense. In a trance, he felt as if he had become the spiritual sense himself, feeling the supreme realm that the spiritual sense had, and comprehending the universe in the spiritual sense's heart. These kinds of strange sensations made Luo Fan feel that his horizons had suddenly risen by a large margin. The Earth's universe seemed to have become simpler in his mind, and, at the same time, more complicated. To say that it was simpler was because everything in the Earth's universe seemed to have some sort of thread that could directly outline everything. To say that it was more complicated was because a deeper layer of mystery that was originally hidden in the depths of the Earth's universe that he could not sense at all had suddenly surfaced, causing the Earth's universe in front of him to be even more profound and unfathomable than he had imagined in the past. Naturally, it was even more complicated. After carefully comprehending it, Luo Fan sighed, lifted his foot, and took a step forward. The spiritual sense doppelganger had already left the world of his sea of consciousness and came out of his body through the mud pill palace between his eyebrows. At this time, Luo Fan's body was sitting cross-legged on the planet's core. Because of the existence of no dirt and no leakage, a vacuum area of several tens of feet was formed. Although the magma layer outside was flowing rapidly, it didn't affect Luo Fan in the vacuum area at all, and the spiritual sense doppelganger that had just appeared in the vacuum area. After the spiritual sense doppelganger appeared, the endless laws and mysteries of the Earth's universe suddenly flashed between his mind and thoughts. All kinds of magical powers and magic arts that were most suitable for the spiritual sense doppelganger to use, allowing the spiritual sense doppelganger to fully display its power, were formed in an instant, making him feel that his magical powers and cultivation were constantly improving. In just a few breaths, it seemed that his doppelganger in the Earth's universe could be instantly destroyed. This feeling was so strong that even Luo Fan couldn't help but want to give it a try, but he quickly suppressed this feeling. This was still just an illusion. This spiritual sense doppelganger possessed all the insights of the original strand of spiritual sense. Therefore, like the previous strand of spiritual sense, it also possessed the many benefits that the original strand of spiritual sense had obtained from the boundless world in the depths of Luo Fan. This stimulated the potential that the original strand of spiritual sense originally possessed. The first thing he had to do after setting foot in any world was to comprehend some of the basic laws of this world and create all kinds of divine abilities that could allow him to unleash supreme power. However, these techniques that could allow him to unleash unparalleled power would have the opposite effect on his spirit, giving him the feeling that he was incomparably powerful and invincible. To say it was perception was naturally because this spiritual sense was actually only spiritual sense. Without a body, all the power comes from the outside world. All power, all divine abilities, all might, the source was not from oneself, but from the outside world. This kind of power, no matter how strong it was only an external object. If one knew its source, they would naturally be able to find a way to directly restrain it and deprive it of its power. If this spiritual sense doppelganger really believed that it was true, what awaited him would perhaps be the same as the previous spiritual sense. After suppressing that feeling, the spiritual sense doppelganger turned around and smashed into the core of the planet below, rapidly advancing toward the core of the planet. No matter how strong a spiritual sense avatar was, it was still fragile without a body. If he wanted to use this spiritual sense avatar to do anything, he needed the spiritual sense avatar to have a physical body. This star core was formed by compressing countless metals. It weighed tens of millions of tons, and the power it produced was unimaginable. Even towards spiritual sense, there were all sorts of indescribable repelling power. The spiritual sense doppelganger wanted to enter, but it felt like it was bearing the pressure of hundreds of millions of mountains at every moment. Every particle of the spiritual sense doppelganger groaned, unable to bear the burden. If this spiritual sense doppelganger only possessed strength, but didn't possess all sorts of comprehension of the great Tao, then it would have no choice but to give up on entering the core of the planet. However, this had never happened before. At this moment, the spiritual sense doppelganger trembled slightly, and countless formation patterns flashed across its body. The various powerful repelling forces produced by the star core were drawn by the formation patterns and directly integrated into the formation patterns in a mysterious and unpredictable way. Then, they were absorbed into the body of the spiritual sense doppelganger, gradually undergoing some kind of incomparably deep fusion with the spiritual sense doppelganger. With this fusion, a feeling of gradually gaining a body gradually arose in the mind of the spiritual sense avatar. This feeling continued to strengthen as the spiritual sense doppelganger approached the core of the star core. When the spiritual sense doppelganger finally entered the core of the star core, the feeling was so strong that it occupied the entire mind of the spiritual sense doppelganger. At the core of the star core, the metal had already become so dense that it had undergone some kind of inexplicable qualitative change. It naturally contained the purest and most powerful magnetic force. When this magnetic force was drawn into the spiritual sense doppelganger's body by the formation patterns, the spiritual sense doppelganger's source involuntarily rippled and directly pounced on it, fusing with the purest and most powerful magnetic force. As the two fused, an inexplicable shock spread out from where the spiritual sense doppelganger was. At first, what shook along with the spiritual sense doppelganger was the star core, which was extremely small, but contained an incredible weight and produced an indescribably powerful gravitational force. After causing the planetary core to tremble, the tremors did not subside. Instead, it continued to spread outwards. After the star core, the surrounding magma layer, the thick mantle, the Earth's crust, even the entire atmosphere of the planet began to shake violently. Looking from the void of the universe, it was as if the entire planet was a powerful exotic beast with intelligence that was slowly waking up from its slumber. It was shaking its body and starting to stretch its body. Faintly, there was a kind of spirituality being emitted from this shock, making the entire planet feel completely different. This planet had 3 satellites that were hundreds of times smaller than the planet. They constantly revolved around the planet according to some kind of inexplicable law. When this vibration occurred, the 3 satellites strangely began to vibrate as well. It was as if the 3 satellites were originally one with the planet, but their positions were rather strange, and they were not in contact with the planet itself. After the shock reverberated dozens of times between the 3 satellites, it finally slowly subsided. After the shock subsided, the originally evenly distributed acquired origin chi of heaven and earth in the void began to slowly condense towards the planet. Of course, this kind of slow condensation was only relative to the planet. If this kind of acquired origin chi of heaven and earth was concentrated on a cultivator, the acquired origin chi of heaven and earth condensed in almost an instant would probably be enough to support a gold core cultivator to directly break through to the leakless gold core, or even the 3 flowers at one's prominence and the 5 chi's unification. Luo Fan, who was sitting cross-legged on the planet's core, slowly opened his eyes. An inexplicable smile appeared on his face. He stood up and stepped into the void. In the blink of an eye, he had already passed through the void and directly arrived outside the planet. Standing in the void of the universe, he looked down at the planet that was 10 times larger than Earth. In a trance, he felt as if he was looking into a mirror. What he saw in his eyes was a wonderful feeling. This wonderful feeling seemed very strange, but Luo Fan knew that this feeling was not an illusion. This planet had indeed become another body of his. The moment the spiritual sense doppelganger merged with the core of the planet had become the body of the spiritual sense doppelganger. It became inseparable from the spiritual sense doppelganger, and the spiritual sense doppelganger could no longer exist without the planet. Unless he could completely refine the planet and change its shape, he would be able to escape the gravitational pull of the star. Only then would he be able to obtain freedom. At this moment, although the spiritual sense doppelganger was still awake, he felt extremely tired. It was as if his body was being pressed down by a world. This feeling of being pressed down couldn't be dispelled by any means. It made his mind feel more and more dizzy, as if he was going to fall into a state of sleep that he hadn't felt for hundreds of millions of years. Whether it was Luo Fan himself or the spiritual sense doppelganger, they both knew this feeling very well. This was because his spiritual sense doppelganger still couldn't completely drive the planet. As long as the spiritual sense doppelganger could grow to the point where it could completely drive the planet, this feeling would naturally disappear. There were two ways for the spiritual sense doppelganger to grow to that level. One was for the spiritual sense doppelganger to constantly cultivate, constantly improve, and constantly grow until it reached the level where it could completely drive the planet. The second way was to comply with this feeling of fatigue and directly fall into a deep sleep. The planet itself would constantly nourish the spiritual sense doppelganger, and the spiritual sense doppelganger would slowly grow under the nourishment of the planet. In the end, it would reach the incredible level where it could completely drive the planet. These two methods each had their advantages and disadvantages. The disadvantage of the first method was that it required endless Luo Fan's endless energy to let the spiritual sense doppelganger constantly cultivate and sharpen. While this brought about the improvement of the spiritual sense, it would also make him suffer unspeakable pain almost all the time. The advantage of this method was that it was fast. It could make the spiritual sense improve to an unimaginable level in at most hundreds of thousands of years, even tens of thousands of years, and directly drive the planet. The advantage of the second method was that Luo Fan didn't need to make any effort at all. He only needed to sleep unconsciously, and the planet would naturally nourish the spiritual sense so that the spiritual sense would continue to grow to the level where it could finally drive the planet. However, the disadvantage of this method was also extremely obvious, and that was the amount of time it would take was too long. According to Luo Fan's calculations, if this method was used, the amount of time it would take would be calculated in the billions of years. It could be said that if this method was used to let the spiritual sense grow, then after 5-6 billion years, when the end of the Dharma ending age, the spiritual sense still couldn't drive the planet, and Luo Fan wouldn't be surprised at all. After some analysis, Luo Fan understood that there seemed to be two methods, but in fact, he had no other choice. Only the first method was feasible. However, for Luo Fan, who was immortal and could travel to the future at will, it was just an existence that could be manipulated at will. It could be said that even if it took a long time, like 100 billion years, to make a small progress, it was acceptable for him. But don't forget that in the future 5-6 billion years or so, there would be a sage. At that time, what would the Earth and the universe look like? Even if Luo Fan's cultivation was increased by 10,000 times, he wouldn't be able to clearly deduce it. How could he let time bring his spiritual sense doppelganger to that time? Therefore, with a slight thought from Luo Fan, the spiritual sense doppelganger forced itself to focus. With a shake of its mind, it outlined invisible formation patterns that constantly entered and exited the planet, gradually building a complicated and mysterious invisible formation inside and outside the planet. The moment the formation was successfully formed, an indescribable attractive force erupted out of nowhere. The endless acquired chi of the world that was gathering in the void began to fill with some kind of evil spirit. This kind of evil spirit continuously condensed from the boundless universe and directly integrated into the invisible formation through some strange channel. Finally, it was directly absorbed by the invisible formation into the planet's core and directly rushed into the spiritual sense doppelganger's body. The moment the evil spirit rushed into the spiritual sense doppelganger's body, the spiritual sense doppelganger suddenly trembled. Its entire body twisted, and from its originally incomparably solid state, it suddenly became illusory and blurry. At the same time, one could see the extremely solid evil spirit madly circulating within its body. Like countless tiny blades constantly cutting, the inside of the spiritual sense doppelganger produced countless sparks, and strands of strange impurities overflowed from the inside of the spiritual sense doppelganger, spreading out of the spiritual sense doppelganger's body. At this moment, the spiritual sense doppelganger only felt an indescribable pain fill its mind, making it feel as if its entire body was being directly crushed, recombined, and crushed again. This endless cycle continued. Just one such feeling was enough to make an ordinary cultivator's mind collapse and soul scatter. Although Luo Fan could bear it, he also felt extremely uncomfortable. Almost at every moment, he wanted to stop and give up. However, this idea of wanting to stop and want to give up was just a thought. Luo Fan's incomparably tenacious will directly suppress this idea of wanting to give up. Instead, he madly pulled the invisible evil spirit from the void to gather and continued to wildly wreak havoc in his body. This evil spirit was a kind of evil spirit that had an unparalleled effect on the soul and spiritual sense, as long as any wisp of it was enough to directly obliterate the soul of an ordinary cultivator in the gold core stage. At this time, the evil spirit condensed by the huge, invisible formation that covered the entire planet was like the waves of the sea, crazily surging, covering the sky and covering the earth. It was almost condensed into a solid substance, and the damage to the soul and spiritual sense was increased by who knows how many times. Such a huge amount of evil chi filled the spiritual sense doppelganger, and in an instant, the spiritual sense doppelganger was submerged, completely erased, and expelled the spiritual sense doppelganger that was not solid enough, not pure enough, and not strong enough. It was like forging iron, constantly tempering the spiritual sense doppelganger. The self-heating effect of this kind of tempering was quite amazing and quite dangerous, but it was the fastest way to improve the power of the spiritual sense doppelganger. As the spiritual sense doppelganger endured the indescribable pain, the sense of fatigue born from the depths of the soul naturally weakened. This was because of the stimulation of the sharp pain, and also because the spiritual sense doppelganger had become stronger than before after the tempering. During this process, the entire planet was also producing subtle vibrations from time to time. This kind of vibration was difficult to distinguish even if it was carefully distinguished, but it had already caused the planet to produce inexplicable changes. When all living beings in the void of the universe saw this planet, they would have a strange feeling that this planet was undergoing some kind of wonderful transformation. Sensing that the cultivation of the spiritual sense doppelganger had entered the right track, Luo Fan directly cut off the direct connection between himself and the spiritual sense doppelganger, so that the spiritual sense doppelganger could no longer suffer from the sharp pain that it was suffering from to invade his mind. Although the sharp pain had many benefits to sharpen one's spiritual sense and will, it affected Luo Fan's cultivation experience. Naturally, Luo Fan would not let it run amok in his mind. Looking at the planet again, he smiled slightly, and his figure moved, turning into a golden light and rushing directly to the center of the star system. After a while, he had crossed a long distance and directly rushed into the star. The infinite stars in the universe were different, and each star had its own characteristics. However, these stars were all the same in essence. They were all formed by the infinite light and heat emitted by some kind of intense change in the essence of matter. The star in front of him was naturally different from the sun, but for Luo Fan, it was not much more difficult to use. With a slight thought, the stainless and leakless technique in his body was directly activated, forming a vacuum area with a radius of several dozen feet around his body, completely isolating all the influence of the flames and heat in the outside world, allowing him to directly arrive at the sun's core without any delay. This star was not the sun, and the entire star system did not even have any life. Naturally, this star did not have a mysterious formation like the sun, but was in a purely natural state. When Luo Fan arrived here, with a thought, with the help of the mysterious understanding brought by the spiritual sense doppelganger. He carefully sensed the place and determined his destination. His figure turned into light, and in a flash, he crossed the void. Soon, he arrived at the surface of the star's core, a position on the surface of the star that was less than half the surface of the star from where he had landed. This position was not the place where the sun's nuclear power was the strongest, nor was it the place where the sun's nuclear power was the weakest, but the surface structure of the sun's core was the most stable. This position was so stable that even if tens of thousands of nuclear bombs exploded here, they would not be able to cause any fluctuations. This was the most perfect place to build a formation. Chapter 659, Forging and Refining. Chapter 620. When he arrived, Luo Fan casually sketched, and the endless flames and heat on the sun's core rapidly gathered between his hands. In an instant, they condensed into countless tiny, dense, and almost unbreakable energy threads. After these energy threads were formed, they followed Luo Fan's movements and began to spiral and twist in the void. They flickered with formation inscriptions and gradually formed a spherical formation, directly wrapping around Luo Fan. After the formation was formed, countless runes suddenly flashed between the endless formation inscriptions, instantly increasing the complexity of the formation by countless times. The spherical formation seemed like a solid sphere in an instant. The dense runes were like atoms, directly supplementing the formation until it was like a physical planet. As the formation changed, the time and space around Luo Fan began to change inexplicably. Time began to distort and speed up, and the space began to expand. In the blink of an eye, time had accelerated to over 10,000 times that of the outside world, and the space had also increased to over 10,000 times that of the outside world. At a glance, there seemed to be no end. Such a change required a tremendous amount of energy to support it. Above the core of the sun, endless flames and heat began to gather around the spherical formation, forming a huge vortex that crazily poured into the formation. During this process, the nature of the vortex was changed by the formation. The flames and heat eventually turned into chaotic energy that was countless times more condensed than the flames and heat. It constantly circulated within the formation, supporting the power of the formation. At the same time, it constantly replenished the space within the formation, causing the space at the center of the formation, which had expanded by over 10,000 times, to gradually be filled with this chaotic energy. It was like returning to the environment when a world was first formed in the ancient times. Luo Fan had absolute confidence. The formation before him was the first formation he had constructed by combining the formation inscriptions from the Kiliacosm galaxy and the runes he had learned from the sun on Earth. However, he did not have any doubts about whether the formation would succeed or not. At this moment, the formation was behaving like this, but he only glanced at it for a moment before letting it go. He lifted his foot and took a light step forward. A lotus platform naturally appeared under his feet and supported him in midair. He sat down cross-legged and slowly closed his eyes. This star was more than 10 times larger than the sun, so its ability to withstand the extraction of energy was at least 10 times stronger than the sun. In other words, only by extracting 10 times the flames and heat of the sun could it create the same great impact as the sun. Therefore, under the control of Luo Fan, the power of extracting flames and heat was at least 10 times stronger than that of the rune formation he had arranged on the core of the sun. Under this kind of extraction power, the vortex outside the spherical formation was incomparably huge and earth-shaking, and the chaotic yuan qi inside the formation was constantly increasing at an astonishing speed. In just a few days, the vast space had been filled, and it had even condensed into a gray mist that spread throughout the entire space. Luo Fan sat cross-legged in the gray mist. His eyes were tightly shut, and his body gave off a calm and peaceful aura. He was like a supreme god that overlooked the world and was filled with love for all things in the world. At this moment, Luo Fan withdrew his thoughts and began to comprehend what he had wanted to comprehend a long time ago. It was the wonderful existence that had condensed out of nowhere in the depths of his soul when he saw the Buddha. I hope you don't disappoint me. For you, I've even gotten rid of that spiritual sense. Such thoughts flashed through Luo Fan's mind. His thoughts continued to delve deeper and deeper, gradually reaching the deepest part of his soul. There were still countless worlds being transformed here. However, the countless worlds formed by his soul were different from the worlds that had enveloped the strand of spiritual sense. What was enveloped in these countless worlds was the indestructible brand that he had obtained from the god of space. Luo Fan had already comprehended these countless worlds and the indestructible brand for who knew how many hundreds of millions of years. Although his knowledge and understanding of the world had increased this time, it was still impossible for there to be a fundamental change. As a result, he turned his attention to the side of the countless worlds, which was also in the deepest part of his soul. There was a completely new, strange existence that definitely did not exist in the depths of his soul before. The strange existence was only the size of a thumb, and its entire body shone brightly. However, it was surrounded by a seemingly vast, yet seemingly extremely small, golden ring of light. This ring of light was extremely profound. At first glance, it seemed to only envelop this strange existence that was the size of a thumb. However, upon closer inspection, one would find that the inside of it was all-encompassing. It seemed to contain an infinitely vast space, and even contained the mysteries of the flow of time. It possessed an incomparably perfect space-time. Sarira, form is not different from emptiness, and emptiness is not different from form. Form is emptiness, and emptiness is form. Looking at the strange existence, inexplicable scriptures seem to circulate in Luo Fan's mind in a trance. This is the Buddha's Sarira. At this moment, Luo Fan came to a sudden realization. Just as this enlightenment was born, the strange golden existence seemed to sense something, and the golden ring of light around it spread out in an instant. This arrangement was completely beyond Luo Fan's control. No matter what changes he made in the depths of his soul, he could not stop this arrangement from unfolding. He could only watch helplessly as the ring of light directly revealed its side that occupied an infinitely vast area. Fortunately, this was still in the depths of Luo Fan's soul. Although he could not stop this ring of light from spreading out by any means, the depths of his soul was after all a place that was completely idealistic to Luo Fan. Therefore, no matter how wide this ring of light spread out, it still did not leave his soul. It did not even affect the countless illusory worlds that were constantly changing and trying to stimulate the inextinguishable imprint. Even so, when the ring of light finished changing, the ring of light was already completely as large as the endless illusory worlds that Luo Fan had conjured next to it. The two were lined up together, like two huge universes that were parallel to each other. Luo Fan's thoughts condensed slightly, and the power of his soul condensed along with it. In the depths of his soul, an incarnation was condensed out of thin air. This incarnation was different from the incarnation that he had condensed in the countless illusory worlds that he had previously condensed with his spiritual consciousness. Back then, the incarnation was only formed by condensing the power of the world with his thoughts. Seriously speaking, it was only an illusion. If it was erased, at most he would lose a thought. But this incarnation here was different. Although the source was also a thought, it was condensed from a huge amount of spiritual energy. If it was obliterated, it wouldn't be a matter of a thought for Luo Fan. Instead, the huge amount of spiritual energy would perish along with the obliteration of this thought. After this incarnation was condensed, Luo Fan sighed. He took a step forward and directly crashed into the huge ring of light. The moment he passed through the ring of light, there seemed to be endless scriptures dispersing from the ring of light and frantically surging into his mind and thoughts. When the Avalokitesvara Bodhisattva walks in the depths of the Prajnaparamita, he sees that the five skandhas are empty and transcends all suffering. If I hear a moment of Buddha's existence, this infinite scripture was like the waves of the sea. It had incredible and irresistible power. It ignored all of Luo Fan's defenses and obstructions and surged into Luo Fan's mind and thoughts without any delay. It was going to completely change his will and reverse his worldview. As soon as Luo Fan sensed this change, he had a thought. A shiny golden pill that gave off a flawless aura appeared, directly freezing his mind and thoughts. It even arranged the endless scriptures around the pill, opening up a small, empty space in the sea of scriptures. However, it allowed him to maintain a trace of clarity in the sea of scriptures. Even so, he felt that it seemed to be countless times more difficult to control his body. The ring of light that originally only required a small step to cross seemed to have become as long as hundreds of millions of light years. It made him feel like he had spent hundreds of millions of years before he could barely pass through the ring of light and escape the impact of the surging sea of scriptures. The moment he passed through the ring of light, the surging sea of scriptures instantly calmed down. Although it did not disappear, it still filled his mind and thoughts, making him feel that his thoughts would bring up the endless scriptures. It made his entire way of thinking seem to change along with the contents of the scriptures. However, it was already like stagnant water, completely frozen by the shiny golden pill that gave off a flawless aura. It could no longer pose a threat to him. This golden pill was the projection of Luo Fan's innate leakless golden core. Luo Fan's innate leakless gold core had already completely fused with his divine soul and his corporeal body, which had turned his divine soul and corporeal body into another kind of innate leakless gold core, which had long lost its individual existence. However, this innate leakless golden core could still be projected. It could still condense a projection in his divine soul, his sea of consciousness, and his Niwen palace. This projection was not the real innate leakless golden core. If it was damaged, it would not affect the innate leakless golden core. However, it could draw on the power of the golden core. It possessed endless mysteries. It was precisely because of this that it was able to stabilize the origin of his mind and isolate the purification of the endless scriptures. That's right, the endless scriptures were purifying Luo Fan just now. They wanted to change his mind, change his worldview, and make Luo Fan break away from his own path of cultivation and directly join the Buddhist path, directly cultivating the Dharma described in the countless scriptures. That was close. I almost fell for it. The eyes of Luo Fan's incarnation narrowed slightly as he thought to himself. During this process, the innate leakless golden core projection in his mind did not relax at all. It still firmly fixed his mind and the endless scriptures that filled his mind. With a slight thought, he gently glanced through the endless scriptures and found that these scriptures were not completely unfamiliar to him. A small part of them were scriptures that he had heard and read on Earth before he transmigrated. Some of them were even famous and were regarded as the most classic scriptures in the secular world. However, whether it was this small part of the scriptures that he had heard and read, or more of the endless scriptures that were simpler or more complicated, they were all broken in a strange way. There were even some extremely mysterious ways to show the difference in tone between the words. These strange ways of breaking sentences and the difference in tone made the scriptures that were originally composed of ordinary words extremely mysterious. It made the scriptures contain all kinds of extremely complicated mysteries, as if they were faintly demonstrating some kind of profound Tao. So the Buddhist scriptures should be read like this. When Luo Fan saw this, he could not help but sigh. No wonder there were no Buddhist cultivators on Earth before he transmigrated. It turned out that although the Buddhist scriptures had been passed down, the true inheritance had long been severed. With a slight thought, the innate leakless golden core projection shook, and endless power was generated, directly sweeping through his mind. As the power swept across, the countless scriptures that had been scattered all over his mind began to gather towards the center like sand that had been swept away. Gradually, they piled up under the projection of the innate leakless gold core, forming an ancient temple that shone with golden light. Although these ancient temples looked like they were made of real metal and stone, and there was nothing illusory about them at all. In fact, they had no physical structure at all. Every bit of structure, every piece of brick and tile, was built by stacking and arranging scriptures that were as small as dust. After the ancient temple was formed, Luo Fan casually patted it, and the ancient temple directly left his mind and appeared outside his body. When it came to Luo Fan's body, the space where Luo Fan was suddenly shook, and in an instant, it was enveloped by endless golden light. The chaotic vitality that had already condensed into a solid fog was suppressed by the golden light and directly piled up into a shallow gray liquid lake below. Even the chaotic vitality could not withstand the pressure of the golden light. Luo Fan's thoughts instantly returned to his corporeal body. He opened his eyes and found that the ancient temple had instantly expanded by an unknown number of times. It almost filled the space of the array he had set up, turning the space of the array into a Buddhist kingdom. Although these scriptures are harmful, they also contain the secrets of Buddhism, so I can't let them go. With that thought, he raised his hand and drew in the air. Streams of chaotic vitality flew up from the chaotic vitality lake below, condensing into countless threads in the air. As he moved, they began to twist in the air, gradually weaving into a palm-sized solid sheet that gave off a bronze luster. After the solid sheet was formed, it gave off an endless attractive force, acting on the huge ancient temple. As it took effect, the entire ancient temple shook slightly. It was directly pulled by this force, and it kept shrinking, gradually sinking into the solid sheet. In the end, it turned into a golden, detailed picture on the solid sheet. With a wave of his hand, the thin sheet landed in Luo Fan's hand. I didn't think that it would need a total of 36 restrictions to contain such a huge amount of information. The Buddhist scriptures are indeed exquisite. Luo Fan sighed. The thin sheet looked simple, but in reality, it was an enchanted artifact that Luo Fan had refined to contain the Buddhist scriptures. Moreover, it was an enchanted artifact that contained 36 restrictions. It could be said that as long as the opportunity arrived, the enchanted artifact would obtain some kind of opportunity and develop a spiritual consciousness. Then, it would naturally become an enchanted artifact, possessing supreme attainments similar to the itinerant immortal realm. Coupled with the countless Buddhist scriptures contained in it, it could even directly set foot on the path of cultivation, and in the end, it was not impossible for it to become a Buddha. However, no matter which universe it was in, the rules were balanced. Once this enchanted artifact developed a spiritual consciousness, it would soar into the sky. One could imagine how difficult it was to develop a spiritual consciousness. It could be said that once it developed a spiritual consciousness, the possibility of it undergoing a great metamorphosis was next to none. He raised his hand and gently wiped the surface of the thin sheet. The picture in the thin sheet quickly rotated according to his gesture, enlarged, and directly displayed a three-dimensional projection above it. This was the function of the thin sheet, and it was the realization of the idea that Luo Fan had obtained from the enchanted artifact that stored cultivation techniques in Lier's hands. After playing with it for a while, Luo Fan casually put the enchanted artifact into his sleeve. At this moment, due to the loss of the pressure from the golden light, the endless chaotic vitality dissipated again and turned into mist, causing the space to become misty again. However, there was a vague shape of an ancient temple. It was the remnant aura left behind by the ancient temple that was still suppressing and affecting the flow of the chaotic vitality. From this, it could be seen how mysterious the scriptures that formed the ancient temple were. After doing this, Luo Fan withdrew his thoughts and directly appeared in the incarnation in the depths of his soul. As his thoughts entered the incarnation's body, the incarnation floating in the light shook and opened its eyes, beginning to see the situation inside the light for the first time. The moment he saw the inside of the light, Luo Fan's expression could not help but become complicated. What appeared in front of him was a boundless Buddhist kingdom. The Buddhist kingdom shone with golden light everywhere, and countless rays of Buddhist light filled the world. There were countless temples and palaces scattered everywhere in the Buddhist kingdom. These temples and palaces seemed to be built with gold bricks and glass. Even the Buddhist light could not conceal the countless splendor that the buildings revealed. In the center of the countless magnificent temples and palaces, a towering spirit mountain rose from the ground, looking like a supreme Buddha overlooking the world. There were circles of Buddhist light on the spirit mountain, illuminating the entire Buddhist kingdom like a fairyland. In the Buddhist kingdom, there were bhikkhus and Buddhas everywhere. All kinds of mysterious Sanskrit chants and scriptures filled the world and faintly entered Luo Fan's ears. Chapter 6:21. Relic. Just as Luo Fan was sizing up the boundless Buddhist kingdom, suddenly, the sound of a bell rang from the spirit mountain in the center. It was like an eternal bell that awakened the world, revealing an extraordinary artistic conception that reverberated between heaven and earth. Even the physical body of the entire Buddhist kingdom began to shake along with the sound of the bell. Amidst the tremors caused by the bell's sound, a golden light suddenly rushed out from the top of the spirit mountain. Like a golden path, it instantly crossed hundreds of millions of miles and arrived in front of Luo Fan, who was only a few millimeters away from him. The moment the golden light appeared, Luo Fan instantly felt some kind of extremely mysterious power radiating from it. This power did not act on matter, but on the minds of all living beings. Under the guidance of this power, all living beings would naturally have the strange thought of doing everything they could to get close to this power. In an instant, Luo Fan understood that this was a guiding force that could guide all living beings that stepped on it to the top of the spirit mountain. At this moment, the end of the golden light was so close to Luo Fan that he only needed to take the slightest, almost wriggling step to easily step on the golden light and be connected to the spiritual mountain by the guiding power contained in it at an unimaginable speed. Looking at the golden path that shot out from the spiritual mountain, Luo Fan's expression did not change at all. Instead, a calm expression appeared on his face. The will in his eyes was extremely resolute. He had a will that was not affected by anything. He just calmly looked at the changes in front of him. When this golden light was emitted from the top of the spirited mountain and appeared in front of Luo Fan, the countless monks, Buddhas, Arhats, and Bodhisattvas in the Buddhist kingdom all stopped what they were doing in an instant. They all raised their heads, put their palms together, and bowed toward the golden light and the spirited mountain where the golden light originated from. As they bowed, the Buddha's light behind their heads shot up into the sky and gathered on the golden light. As the endless Buddha's light gathered, the golden path was illuminated like a bridge that crossed the sea of bitterness to the other shore. At this moment, it seemed to be loaded with endless mysteries. Countless strange patterns appeared in the golden light, and there were also endless faintly discernible bodies that appeared on it. This change added a feeling to the golden path that as long as one stepped on it, they would be able to directly cross the sea of bitterness to the other shore and obtain the eternal true meaning of the great Tao. At this moment, the spirit mountain in the center of the Buddhist kingdom shook slightly. Within the boundless Buddhist light it emitted, there were suddenly countless lofty and majestic figures of Buddhas that emitted boundless might, as if they controlled boundless space-time and boundless universes. They were faintly discernible. At the same time, there were all kinds of whispers coming from the Buddha's light. They penetrated hundreds of millions of miles and entered Luo Fan's ears very clearly. It was as if countless Buddhas were explaining the mysteries of the great Tao to him. It was as if countless supreme existences were summoning him to step on the golden light and join them. The explanations of these Buddhas seemed to be the same as the feelings that had surged into his mind when he passed through the light circle, but they had directly bestowed all kinds of incredible mysteries to Luo Fan. It was as if the source of these feelings was directly revealed to Luo Fan, and all the mysteries of the great Tao that were on the same level as the great Tao were directly revealed to him. The moment the explanations of these Buddhas entered his ears, Luo Fan seemed to feel that the mysteries of the zenith heaven that he had been dreaming of, as well as the mysteries of the same level as the mysteries of the zenith heaven, were directly revealed to him. Even the mysteries of the essence of Han, which he had never dared to dream of, were directly hidden behind these mysteries. All he needed to do was to take a step forward, step onto the golden path, and join the endless Buddhas. Then he would be able to easily obtain the mysteries of the zenith heaven and even the mysteries of the essence of Han. This feeling was so real and so impossible that it made Luo Fan almost doubt whether he had fallen into an illusion and whether everything in front of him was just a strange illusion. However, after he carefully examined it and even sensed it through his will that could see through all appearances and see through all essences, he could not help but be extremely shocked. All these feelings were actually not illusions, nor were they illusions formed by the extraterrestrial demons that he had encountered when he went through tribulations in the past. Instead, they were real. Laid out in front of him was really a golden path that could directly lead to the mysteries of the zenith heaven and even the higher mysteries of essence of Han. As long as he stepped onto this golden path, perhaps he would not be able to directly obtain the mysteries of the zenith heaven, understand the true meaning of the zenith heaven, and directly become a Khanate zenith heaven cultivator or attain the zenith heaven Tao fruit. As for the above mysteries of essence of Han, it was even more impossible for him to directly obtain them without any obstruction. However, in essence, there was not much difference. As long as he stepped on this golden light, what he needed to truly obtain this kind of mystery was only the accumulation of a long period of time. For Luo Fan, who had endless time, what was the difference between this and truly obtaining these kinds of mysteries? However, Luo Fan's shock only lasted for a moment. After he understood all of this, Luo Fan's expression was still unshaken, and his gaze was still as indifferent and firm as before. Based on his appearance, it was as if the golden light before him was just an ordinary light, and it was as if the Buddha image that was calling out to him was just a real image. This was not an act. In the depths of his soul, who was he putting on an act for? This sort of expression came directly from the bottom of his heart, and it came from his truest thoughts. Because Luo Fan knew better than anyone what would happen after he stepped onto this golden light. If Luo Fan stepped onto this golden light, he would naturally be able to naturally obtain the mysteries of the zenith heaven and even the mysteries of essence of Han after a certain period of time. However, after Luo Fan saw the changes in the sky, he already knew that so long as he really stepped onto this golden light, then perhaps he would no longer be himself. Persisting in oneself did not mean maintaining one's most primitive state, where one's self-awareness had just been born and would never change. In reality, this was also impossible. No living being, no matter how strong or weak, no matter how determined or weak, could find themselves, even if there was no change in any moment. Any living being's mentality, character, emotions, and even would undergo various changes, big or small, with a passage of time. It could be said that one's self at any moment would definitely be different from any moment before. However, that kind of change started from oneself. It was the natural growth or regression of one's will after experiencing all sorts of thorns in the outside world. The source of all changes was oneself, so one could naturally be called oneself. Even if this kind of change might cause one's current mentality to be completely opposite from one's previous mentality and the complete reversal of good and evil, it was still the same in essence. The reason why Luo Fan said that once he stepped onto this golden light, he might no longer be himself was because the infinite scriptures contained in this golden light contained an infinite power that could change one's heart. This kind of change to one's heart could allow one's mentality to continuously approach the supreme realm of scriptures. It could continuously approach the supreme Buddha, who was surrounded by endless galaxies and endless universes, allowing one's heart to continuously approach the legendary state of great enlightenment. In the end, one would comprehend the various mysteries of Buddhism, and in the end, one would possess supreme divine abilities and obtain boundless power. One could even transcend the universe and transcend the great Tao. However, although the change caused by this kind of change could allow one to ultimately obtain unimaginable divine abilities and power, it itself went straight into the life source of one's being and directly changed the life source of one's being. This kind of change that allowed one's mentality to approach the Dharma, approach the Buddha, and approach the state of great enlightenment did not come from one's own will at all. Instead, it was a change caused by the outside world using an incomparably domineering method to directly distort one's mentality and change one's will. This kind of change was clearly different from the change caused by the passage of time for ordinary living beings. Under the passage of time, the changes caused by the endless changes of the outside world could cause any living being to develop a different mentality, temperament, and will from all other living beings. Any change came from the self of a living being. They were all the expansion and evolution of a certain characteristic of a living being. In essence, there was naturally no difference between this living being and the past. As for the changes caused by the scriptures on the golden light, in the end, what was achieved was a Buddha that was unique to thousands of people. After experiencing the changes caused by these scriptures, the mentality, temperament, emotions, and even will of a living being would eventually be no different from that of other Buddhas. In other words, after being completely changed by these scriptures, as long as the same face and appearance were changed, even the most observant cultivator would not be able to tell the difference between two Buddhas. Perhaps, to use a term from before Luo Fan transmigrated, this kind of change was simply a kind of copy. It was a copy of the individual described in the scriptures, the Supreme Buddha who is the origin of all Buddhist scriptures, allowing every living being who obtained these scriptures to eventually grow into another Buddha. Of course, in order to become a Buddha that was unique to thousands of people, to become the supreme copy of the Buddha that was the origin of the scriptures, it could only be the final achievement of the infinite scriptures. Before reaching the final achievement of the infinite scriptures, there were still more or less differences between any two Buddhas. The reason for this was very simple. There were differences in the comprehension of all living beings, and their understanding of the scriptures was different. The mysteries of the scriptures that they could truly comprehend were naturally different, and the extent of the changes in the end were naturally different. Even if they reached the same goal by different means, they would eventually become the copy of the Buddha. However, before reaching this final achievement, they would definitely have their own characteristics. It was precisely because of this that there were so many different Buddhas in the legends, so many Bhikkhus, Arhats, and Bodhisattvas. It was also why there was such a huge difference between the Buddha that Yin Kong and the Buddha that Luo Fan saw in a trance. However, even if the final perfection reached the highest state of the scriptures and became the copy of the Buddha, becoming the same as the Buddha, before that, after all, they were already constantly being changed, and they were already gradually abandoning themselves, gradually becoming not themselves. This result, and whether or not they could achieve the final achievement, whether or not they could become the Supreme Buddha, there was no essential difference. It was not something that any living being who had a clear understanding of themselves was willing to do. At the moment when the golden light was incomparably close to him, Luo Fan saw the golden light clearly like never before. He saw through the essence of the scriptures and the essence of the infinite Dharma. How could he still step on it and sink himself into a dead end? Standing in the void, regardless of the countless Bhikkhus, Buddhas, Arhats, and Bodhisattvas worshipping him, regardless of the continuous receiving force coming from the golden light, regardless of the countless Buddha shadows on top of the spirited mountain calling him, Luo Fan remained indifferent and did not move at all. The time and space of the Buddhist kingdom was extremely strange, as if it could be controlled by one's mind. As long as one's mind moved, billions of years could be turned into an instant, and an instant could also be turned into billions of years. Luo Fan did not know how long he had been in this state. It seemed like trillions of years had passed, but it also seemed like only a short moment had passed. The entire Buddhist kingdom suddenly shook, and the expressions of the countless Bhikkhus, Buddhas, Arhats, and Bodhisattvas gradually changed. A kind of anger that had been suppressed for an unknown period of time seemed to have obtained some kind of power, and it gradually flashed on their faces, accumulated, and finally exploded. The moment this anger exploded, black shadows shot into the sky from the Buddhist light behind the heads of these Buddhas, Bhikkhus, Arhats, and Bodhisattvas, and they quickly headed for where Luo Fan was. Soon, they quickly gathered in the void in front of Luo Fan. In the end, as the entire void shook, they condensed into 5 ferocious figures that emitted endless baleful auras, endless anger, and endless killing intent. Looking at their appearances, they were the 5 wisdom kings that Buddha Yin Kong had condensed back then. However, the 5 wisdom kings were already exuding a supreme and unparalleled might, and their bodies were emitting an extremely pure, true intent of destruction. Clearly, Luo Fan's indifference during this period of time finally made the countless Bhikkhus, Buddhas, Arhats, and Bodhisattvas in the entire Buddhist kingdom angry, and they then evolved into the world-shaking 5 wisdom kings in the void. It was precisely because these 5 wisdom kings were condensed from the anger of countless existences that their strength had reached an unimaginable level. As expected, even their expressions of anger are the same. They really aren't their original selves anymore. When Luo Fan saw these existences that were thousands of times more powerful than the 5 wisdom kings that Yin Kong had condensed, he did not panic at all. Instead, he sighed. Even their expressions of anger were exactly the same. The details of the 5 wisdom kings were exactly the same as the 5 wisdom kings that Yin Kong had condensed. Who would believe that these existences had not changed at all? At this moment, the 5 wisdom kings were tall and majestic, and the power and killing intent they emitted were earth-shattering. They even shook the entire Buddhist kingdom, causing Luo Fan to feel that his body was being suppressed by an indescribably terrifying power. It seemed like he could collapse at any time, but it was unable to shake his will or make him retreat. After the 5 wisdom kings were formed, they each reached out and grabbed. The golden path that shot out from the Central Spirit Mountain was grabbed into countless golden light spots that scattered in all directions. In the end, it was unable to shake his will or make him retreat. The bell, which had been ringing for an unknown period of time, suddenly disappeared, as if it had never appeared in the first place. The boundless Buddhist radiance emitted by the spirited mountain instantly returned to its original calm state, and the countless Buddhas' phantoms gradually disappeared. With the disappearance of the Buddhas, the various explanations that were revealed from the Buddhist light also disappeared without a trace. At this moment, the 5 wisdom kings each let out a wild roar towards the sky. The roar swept through the entire Buddhist kingdom, causing the void of the entire Buddhist kingdom to wrinkle. Even the flow of time in the Buddhist kingdom seemed to slow down. Then, boundless dark golden light erupted from the 5 wisdom kings' bodies. The light covered the sky and was extremely dazzling. There seemed to be a clear barrier between the light and the original Buddhist light, but also seemed to fuse together perfectly, as if there was no distinction between them. Amidst the dark golden radiance, the 5 wisdom monarchs spread out their huge hands and fiercely enveloped Luo Fan from all directions. The 5 wisdom kings' huge hands were extremely condensed, and it was impossible to tell that they were illusory at all. They seemed to contain hellish worlds. As they pressed towards Luo Fan, the countless living beings that were fighting seemed to have suddenly changed targets. They changed the direction of their strongest powers, wanting to break through these hells and rush towards Luo Fan. A feeling as if the void around him had been completely sealed surged in Luo Fan's heart. The entire space-time in the Buddhist kingdom seemed to have turned into the toughest and sharpest matter in the universe. It was constantly pressing down on him, wanting to grind him into dust. The power of this move had far exceeded the limits of what Luo Fan could endure. Even if his main body was here, he would definitely not be able to withstand such an attack. Moreover, he was currently only a clone formed from the condensation of his spirit's power with a single thought. It was many times weaker than his main body. However, even in such a dangerous situation, Luo Fan still did not have the slightest fear, let alone panic. There was even a faint smile on his face. "You are just a Saraira? Show your true form." He spat out these indifferent words. The words were light and did not contain any power. However, they spread through the entire Buddhist kingdom in an instant. They even fused into every brick, every grain of sand, and every plant. They were almost directly engraved into the foundation of the Buddhist kingdom. The result made it seem as if the voice had come from the entire Buddhist kingdom, producing an earth-shattering commotion. Chapter 6:22. Then, in the blink of an eye, the entire Buddhist kingdom was suddenly covered in fine cracks. These cracks were so densely packed that it seemed as though the entire Buddhist kingdom was formed by the accumulation of these fine cracks. Baidu's search, Heavenly Dragon Net. This state seemed to last for an instant, but it also seemed to last for billions of years. In a trance, these countless fine cracks joined together, and the entire Buddhist kingdom instantly collapsed, turning into countless tiny, dust-like golden fragments, condensing into a golden mist that enveloped the entire world around Luo Fan's body. The golden mist gradually dissipated. The truth hidden behind the Buddhist kingdom was gradually revealed. There was an irregular, finger-sized solid metal ball floating in the boundless, pitch-black space. It was like a light that dispelled the darkness and guided the way, allowing anyone to see it from any location in the space. On the surface, this golden solid looked exactly the same as the Saraira that Luo Fan saw when he first entered the depths of his spirit. However, the feeling it gave off was like heaven and earth. It was almost impossible to tell that it was the same object. The golden solid that had previously revolved around the light ring gave off an indescribable majesty and profoundness. However, at this moment, it was just a golden solid. Apart from the light, it was no different from an ordinary object. At this moment, the space where Luo Fan was in was surrounded by a faintly discernible light barrier that was covered in countless cracks. The light barrier was extremely strange. One could see it from inside, but not feel its light. One could only know that the light barrier existed there, and that it was a light barrier. Only from the outside could one see the endless splendor on its surface. One could clearly see why the light barrier was called a light barrier. Although Luo Fan couldn't see outside the light barrier and could only see the countless fine cracks, he was in the depths of his spirit after all. He could directly sense what was outside the light barrier. At this moment, outside the light barrier, the countless worlds that had originally wrapped around the indestructible mark had already moved along with it. The light barrier had long since been devoured by the countless illusory worlds. The indestructible imprint had also moved from the depths of the countless worlds to the light screen at this moment, after going through countless changes. It came into contact with the light screen, and the endless mysteries of the great Tao contained within it were stimulated by the wonders of the light screen. It flooded the light screen and continuously invaded it. It wanted to assimilate the light screen and obtain the mysteries contained within it. The indestructible imprint came from the 7 sages of the sages. Its might had reached an unimaginable level. Although this light barrier also came from that immeasurably powerful Buddha, there was still a huge difference in numbers. The difference in power between the two naturally couldn't be ignored. It was precisely because of this that so many cracks had appeared on the light barrier under the impact of the indestructible mark. Even the vast Buddhist kingdom had been converted into this space under the impact of the indestructible mark. This allowed the golden relic to gather all of its power in the circle of light and retract all of its phenomena. No wonder the 7 sages could only form a single indestructible mark. So the indestructible marks can also devour each other. Luo Fan couldn't help but sigh when he saw this. He had already understood this in his heart. Although the relic and the indestructible mark had different names, and they didn't come from the same supreme existence, their essence was the same. They were both formed naturally by the great Tao, because he had seen existences that had reached an unimaginable level. They were the mysteries of the great Tao that he had not comprehended, but were formed by the great Tao. It was precisely because of this that the relic could also become an indestructible mark. It was just that it was more special and more targeted. It was precisely because the relic was also a type of indestructible mark that it possessed the characteristics of an indestructible mark. At this moment, the reaction of the indestructible mark that originally existed in the depths of his soul when it came into contact with the relic was enough to prove the relationship between the various indestructible marks. Understanding this relationship, Luo Fan could vaguely guess that the space-time god must have formed 7 indestructible marks in his body when he saw the 7 sages. It was just that after a long period of development, these marks had devoured each other and fused with each other, ultimately transforming into the only indestructible mark in front of him. The reason why Luo Fan had obtained only 1 indestructible mark and not 7 was because he had used the space-time god to see the 7 sages. Strictly speaking, his indestructible mark had been stolen from the space-time god, so it was naturally the only indestructible mark that had been developed by the space-time god's body for countless years. And now, the various changes had already foreshadowed what would happen next. That huge indestructible mark would definitely devour the Saraira in front of it, and it would definitely obtain all the mysteries contained within the Saraira. After sighing, Luo Fan turned to look at the relic that had already turned into an ordinary golden object with complicated feelings. He now had a new understanding of the difference between Buddhas and sages. When he recognized the essence of this relic, he also understood how special it was. Although it was also an indestructible brand, the indestructible brand obtained from a saint was only formed naturally by the great Tao. Although it could vaguely point to a certain saint, and could even be sensed by the saint because it was touched, the truth was that it had no intrinsic connection with the saint. As the source of the indestructible brand, the saint would not care about who formed the indestructible brand, nor would he care about the consequences of the indestructible brand to the person who obtained it. However, the relic was different. The relic was something that all the Buddhist scriptures said was necessary to achieve enlightenment. The relic contained the true mysteries of all the Buddhist scriptures, all the mysteries of Buddhism, the realms of Buddhism, and even the supreme mysteries of attracting living beings to Buddhism. This was naturally not something that the indestructible mark formed directly by the great Tao could achieve. It was obvious that when the relic was formed, the Buddha must have done something. When the relic was formed, the Buddha must have used his supreme power to distort the great Tao, turning the indestructible mark that originally had nothing to do with the Buddha into a relic. It turned the object that was formed naturally by the laws of the great Tao into a legacy of Buddhism. The difference between the sages and the Buddhas could be seen. Luo Fan could not tell whether the Buddha's method was brilliant or the sage's method was brilliant. After all, it was far beyond the supreme realm that he was currently in. However, he knew that if he had to choose, he would rather join the sages and cultivate the sages' methods than get involved with anything related to Buddhism. With a slight thought, Luo Fan let out a sigh and took a step forward. In an instant, he crossed the endless void, directly passed through the light shield, and appeared in the world he had created in the outside world. The world that Luo Fan had conjured was a soul chaos. Time, space, matter, energy, rules, laws, everything was in such a mess that he could not distinguish them at all. In this soul chaos, there was a huge light shield covering the central area. Outside the shield, there was a strange three-dimensional mark that seemed to be only the size of a fist that was in contact with the shield. That brand was so mysterious. It was spitting out countless rays of light. Countless mysterious patterns splashed out from the brand, constantly wrapping around the light shield. It seemed like it was going to wrap around the entire light shield and even devour it. The countless cracks on the light barrier were caused by the corrosion of these patterns. So, you're a sage's follower. At that moment, a leisurely voice suddenly entered Luo Fan's ears. As the voice entered his ears, Luo Fan seemed to see an infinitely tall Buddha looking down at him from the clouds. Luo Fan was not surprised by the appearance of the voice. He had been waiting for the appearance of the voice the moment he touched the relic. Therefore, he only smiled and said, "Should I call you Buddha? There's only one Buddha in this world." The voice seemed to have an inexplicable meaning. "Buddha, did you descend into the depths of my soul to purify me?" Luo Fan asked. Since you've already rejected our sect, that's your choice. Why would I force you to join us? The Buddha sighed. Luo Fan raised his head and looked at a certain spot in the light shield. He smiled and said, Do you think I don't know the mysteries of the Buddhism sect? Do you really know? How do you know that the mysteries you know are the true mysteries? Your realm is so low, so how do you dare to guess the mysteries of your realm? The voice seemed to have come from the place where Luo Fan's gaze was locked onto. Although the words that came out were aggressive, the voice was so calm that it was quite strange. I don't need to know everything. Just a part of it is enough for me to understand the essence of the Buddhism sect, Luo Fan said. Even if what you know is the truth, how do you know that this method can't allow people to transcend? The voice asked. The voice was unclear, but Luo Fan already knew what it was trying to express. It was saying that this kind of distorted self might only be a process, and that the final achievement would be to return to one's original self and regain one's original self. However, it was obvious that it was definitely not reaching the Buddha's current realm. Luo Fan had already understood through the Buddhist scriptures that reaching the Buddha's realm, the final achievement would still be the Buddha himself, and it would still be the Buddha's clone. Luo Fan only smiled and did not speak again. He had waited for the Buddha to appear to test what kind of power the Buddha had after entering the depths of his soul. From the looks of it, the Buddha seemed to have some misgivings, but he could not fully display his power in the depths of his soul, so he could only use his mouth. What a pity. The voice sighed and then fell into silence. At that moment, the crack in the light shield instantly expanded, instantly shattering the light shield into countless pieces, causing it to collapse and disappear. Then, the countless lines directly passed through the light shield, collapsing the endless void within it, and directly wrapped around the extremely ordinary golden object in the center. Although the golden object was also a type of indestructible brand, after being modified by the Buddha, it had gained all sorts of incredible power, but had also lost some of its characteristics. Although it was essentially the same as the indestructible brand, it had no ability to resist being wrapped by the countless lines. It was easily pulled by the countless lines and gradually floated towards the indestructible brand itself. In the end, it crashed into the countless lines around the indestructible brand and finally completely disappeared within the indestructible brand. The entire process was so straightforward that it was beyond imagination, and even Luo Fan began to have some doubts. Could this be the Buddha's true intention? Although this thought appeared, it was only for a moment. After a moment, Luo Fan twisted his body and directly left the gray, chaotic world. Right at the instant his body left the world, the indestructible brand suddenly shook, and its shape suddenly underwent a tremendous change. An invisible mark of the Tao surged out from the brand, and in an instant, it destroyed this world that was like a chaotic soul. It even spread out and directly destroyed hundreds of thousands of worlds, forming an area that was even more chaotic, and even Luo Fan was unable to invade and sense it. This area was separated from the countless worlds. Although it was still in the center of the countless worlds, isolated from Luo Fan's source, it was a separate entity, and no world could invade it. No matter how many worlds entered it, they could only be annihilated by this area, and in the end become a part of this area, and instead become a help to strengthen this area. In this area, there was no time, no space, no matter, no energy, no rules, no laws, but it seemed as if everything was entangled in one place, as if everything existed. This was an approximate state. It was a state that was far closer to the soul chaos than what Luo Fan had simulated in that world. Previously, when Luo Fan transformed the world created by his divine soul into the state of soul chaos, it looked no different from the state of soul chaos. His soul was in chaos, and even the space-time had become incomparably chaotic. But that was only the soul chaos state that Luo Fan understood. This soul chaos state was naturally hundreds of millions of miles away from the real soul chaos state. It was precisely because of this that the soul chaos could exist in the world that Luo Fan had transformed. Although it had infinite power of annihilation, it could not stop Luo Fan from entering and leaving. But now the soul chaos state was different. The soul chaos was originally the place where worlds were born, where heaven and earth were born, and where all things evolved. How could it appear in a world? As long as a soul chaos appeared in a world, it would no longer be a soul chaos, but a soul chaos. Therefore, it could be said that the soul chaos state that Luo Fan had transformed was, in fact, just a soul chaos state. Although this soul chaos state was extremely powerful and almost exuded a bit of soul chaos aura, it was still just a soul chaos state. But at this moment, the soul chaos that had appeared in the range of countless worlds was a soul chaos that had been formed after the annihilation of hundreds of thousands of worlds. This kind of soul chaos was fundamentally very different from the real soul chaos, but could already be regarded as a kind of state similar to soul chaos, and was no longer the state that Luo Fan had been in before, which could only be called soul chaos. Luo Fan's previous soul chaos state was formed by extreme distortion and destruction of space-time, matter, energy, laws, and rules. But now this soul chaos had truly reverted space-time, matter, energy, laws, and rules to its original soul chaos state. It could be said that it had everything, but it could also be said that it had nothing. This mysterious, indescribable, and incomprehensible state had appeared in the depths of Luo Fan's spirit. Naturally, it was beyond Luo Fan's perception. Although this place was in the depths of his spirit, he could do nothing about it, let alone invade it. He could not even know what state the immortal mark was in. After understanding this, Luo Fan dispersed his thoughts and returned his mind to his body. His body, which was sitting cross-legged in the boundless soul chaos, slowly opened his eyes. There was no frustration or dispiritedness in his eyes. There was only an inexplicable excitement. That's right, Luo Fan's heart was filled with excitement at this moment. The soul chaos was a place that only real sages who had attained soul origin Tao fruit and cultivators who had far surpassed the Khanate Zenith Heaven could set foot in. As long as one had not reached these realms, no matter how strong one's strength was, one could not penetrate the world barrier and enter it. Even if one entered it through special means, one would be annihilated in an instant, leaving nothing behind. However, the soul chaos could give birth to a world like the untainted land, a world like the Jilly Great World, a boundless universe like the Earth universe, and a world like the world where the Buddha lived. Even sages could not comprehend 1/10 of the mysteries contained in it. If Luo Fan could enter the soul chaos and comprehend a little bit, attaining Zenith Heaven Tao fruit would be as easy as turning his hand over. But that was obviously just an extravagant hope. He could not enter the soul chaos without forming soul origin. Even if Luo Fan was not afraid of death, he could not break through the world barrier and enter it, let alone comprehend its mysteries. Because of this, how could Luo Fan not be excited that such a chaotic state had appeared in the depths of his divine soul at this moment? Chapter 623. Although this chaotic state appeared in the depths of Luo Fan's soul, it also allowed Luo Fan to test it at any time and comprehend the profundities of this chaotic state. He originally needed to transcend a few realms to have a chance to comprehend it, but now it appeared in the depths of his soul at this moment, allowing him to comprehend and test it at any time. How could Luo Fan not be excited? After a while, Luo Fan finally recovered from his shock. Although he didn't gain as much from testing the Saraira as he did from the inextinguishable brand, and he even had to make the Saraira collide with the inextinguishable brand and be devoured before he could escape. As long as this chaotic state existed, it was already an unexpected gain that exceeded Luo Fan's imagination, and it was enough to make him satisfied. Right at this moment, a supreme force suddenly appeared out of thin air in the outside world, and it seemed to have crossed the universe and space-time to bombard him. As this force blasted over, an indescribable sense of danger suddenly surged in Luo Fan's heart. It was like he was an extremely weak ant facing a divine dragon that soared in the sky, and his eternally unmoving heart even started to tremble slightly. In an instant, Luo Fan understood that this force was at least from a Khanate grand heavenly realm cultivator, or even a supreme cultivator that was countless times stronger than incarnate grand heavenly realm cultivator. Only in this way could it pressure his heart and make his eternally unmoving heart tremble like this with just this force alone. With a slight thought, his figure tunneled into the space-time gap, and he vanished on the spot. The moment his figure disappeared, a huge palm slammed into the star and went deep into the sun's core, directly smashing the spherical formation that Luo Fan had set up in the sun's core into dust. The palm even went deeper and stirred up the entire star, causing various parts of the star to tremble. It was as if a balloon had suddenly burst, and pillars of fire shot up from all directions, completely wiping out the 10 or so planets that were closest to the star. Fortunately, it didn't destroy the planet that Luo Fan's spiritual sense doppelganger had refined, but still affected the planet and caused a huge change in its environment. The atmosphere of the planet dissipated by more than half, and the surface of the planet was almost flattened. Fortunately, this pillar of fire only appeared once, and it quickly passed. After the pillar of fire passed, the atmosphere returned to its original state under some kind of natural law. After a long time, it even calmed down, although it had become much thinner. At this moment, Luo Fan's figure materialized and appeared in the void above the planet, looking at the distant star. What he had used just now was the method he had used to escape from the aftermath of Yin Kong's last attack in the Kiliacosm galaxy. He used the method of traveling through space-time to cross the void and escape from his original position. What kind of existence is it? Why did it attack me? After Luo Fan's figure appeared, this was the only thought in his mind. At this moment, in the distant star, a huge palm rushed out from the other side of the star. Although the palm was huge, it was still extremely insignificant compared to a planet or a star. However, it had pierced through the entire star with one attack, causing such a huge turbulence on the star and even directly wiping out 10 or so planets in the star system. One could imagine how shocking the power contained in it was. At this moment, after the palm pierced through the star, it seemed to have sensed some aura. With a turn, it disappeared without a trace in an instant. The moment it disappeared, Luo Fan felt an inexplicable sense of danger. His figure shook, and he instantly crossed the void, arriving outside the star system. Just as his figure disappeared, the palm pierced through the void and directly slapped the spot where he was originally. The power contained in the palm was earth-shattering. The void that the palm came into contact with instantly disappeared, turning into a huge black hole that remained where it was. The planet that Luo Fan's consciousness clone refined even changed its orbit under the attraction of the black hole, gradually drifting towards the black hole. Fortunately, although the black hole was huge, it was only on the scale of a normal person. Compared to the universe, compared to a planet, the black hole was still too small. Therefore, in just a breath's time, it was directly erased by some kind of rule in the universe on Earth, causing the black hole to disappear and the void in that location to return to normal. With the disappearance of the black hole, the attraction that had changed the orbit of the planet naturally disappeared as well. The planet stopped moving closer to the location of the black hole, but its orbit that had changed did not return to normal. Instead, under the gravitational force of the star, it began to readjust its course to a new balance, continuing to revolve around the star in the center. It was not only the planet that changed its orbit, but also the 3 satellites outside the planet. Moreover, the trajectories of the 3 satellites changed more than the planet. After all, the 3 satellites were many times smaller than the planet, and the gravitational force of the planet was far less powerful than the gravitational force of the star. Naturally, the influence of the black hole's attraction was greater. Under this influence, the trajectories of the 3 satellites overlapped to a certain extent. This overlap made it possible for the 3 satellites to collide at some point in the future, and it might even cause an impact that could affect the planet. If the planet had already produced life at that time, it would be a huge impact that could cause the extinction of life. Of course, this kind of collision would not happen in a short period of time, and it would take at least tens of millions of years for them to really collide. After all, although the influence of the black hole was huge, the time of influence was too short, and the changes to the trajectories were not too much. The changes caused by each revolution of the 3 satellites were negligible, and it would naturally take an extremely long time for the changes in trajectories to accumulate until they collided. The palm even dared to recklessly pierce through a star. It was even more dismissive of the destruction of the dozen or so planets caused by piercing through a star. Why would it care about the trivial matter of the 3 satellites colliding in the distant future? It turned around and once again slapped towards Luo Fan, who had traveled through the void and arrived outside the star system. Looking at the palm, Luo Fan's eyes flashed, and his vigilance rose to an unimaginable level. He directly met the palm with both hands. The palm's speed was extremely shocking, although it did not travel through the void this time, and it directly crossed the distance to reach Luo Fan. It only took a breath's time to cross the void and arrive in front of Luo Fan, slapping towards Luo Fan. Moreover, in the process of passing through Luo Fan, the void stagnated, and an indescribably powerful force was generated from all directions, surrounding Luo Fan and locking down the void. Even time seemed to be frozen by this force, making it impossible for Luo Fan to tear through the void or even travel through space-time to escape. However, Luo Fan did not intend to escape at this moment. If he could not escape after escaping twice, there would be no point in escaping a third time. The person who had sent out this palm was clearly many light years away. To be able to discover him and attack him across such a great distance, he would probably not be able to escape no matter how far he escaped. Although he knew that the palm in front of him might have come from an existence who was many times more powerful than him, he did not show the slightest bit of fear after making up his mind. As he clapped his hands, countless formation patterns, countless runes, and gusts of core chi were produced. They weaved in the air in an extremely subtle and profound way. In the end, they turned into a seemingly all-encompassing, yet incomparably pure and condensed soul chaos brilliance that flew towards the palm in front of him. The chaotic soul splendor was so mysterious. When it appeared, the void distorted, and the great Tao strengthened it. There were even faint traces of spirituality being born within the brilliance, causing it to let out a roar filled with fighting spirit. It was wrapped in the power produced by the infinite distortion of the void and the power of the great Tao, and it charged straight towards the palm. The splendor and the palm came into contact. In an instant, the void shattered, and time and souls were thrown into chaos. The spirituality that was born from the splendor let out painful and furious howls in that instant. In the shattered void and chaotic time, it frantically resisted and strangled the palm. However, the power of the palm had already reached an unimaginable level. Even though the splendor was so terrifying and profound, it still could not stop it. In an instant, the palm charged out of the shattered void and chaotic time and continued slapping towards Luo Fan. Luo Fan naturally did not expect that his move would be able to easily stop the palm. The power contained within the palm itself was beyond imagination. It had reached the level of a Khanate Grand Luo, or even a supreme level. How could it be stopped so easily? If the splendor could be stopped, he would be surprised instead. In the instant that the palm charged out, a 1-acre large auspicious cloud appeared out of thin air 3 feet above his head. In the auspicious cloud, 3 green lotuses with chaotic soul splendor rapidly opened and closed, causing the great Tao in the depths of the Earth's universe to condense supreme power. Countless pearls hung down from the auspicious cloud, tightly wrapping around an area of 1 acre around Luo Fan's body, forming a domain that emitted an unbreakable and indestructible aura. The palm shook the moment the domain appeared and seemed to pause for a moment. However, it quickly continued slapping towards Luo Fan without any hesitation. It had not slowed down in the slightest, and its power was still earth-shattering. It carried with it an unstoppable and destructive aura. Crack, an earth-shattering sound instantly reverberated in space, and an indescribably powerful shockwave had already spread out in all directions before the sound could be heard. It caused the free energy in space to instantly collapse, and even caused the space to distort, as if it was on the verge of collapsing. Under the shock wave, Luo Fan, along with the domain around him, turned into a ray of light and flew backward. He was like a meteorite wandering in the void, drawing a long, straight line in the void. The power contained in that palm was so astonishing that the auspicious cloud above Luo Fan's head directly collapsed and dissipated under this slap. Although the tricolored flower did not collapse and disappear because of this slap, it was also directly slapped back into the sea of consciousness. Even the power of the tricolored flower was swept back into the sea of consciousness, causing the entire sea of consciousness to undergo an earth-shattering shock, producing countless tiny cracks and almost collapsing. The pearls hanging down from the auspicious cloud, which occupied an area of 1 acre, were instantly crushed into dust and disappeared without a trace. However, this still could not stop the impact of that power. After the power destroyed the pearls and the auspicious cloud, blasted the 3 flowers back into the sea of consciousness, and caused countless damages to the sea of consciousness, it still acted on Luo Fan's body. Under this power, Luo Fan only felt his body tremble, and an indescribable pain instantly drowned his mind and consciousness. This pain surpassed everything, and even made Luo Fan's entire mind sink. His vision turned black, and he even felt his will gradually dissipate, gradually sinking toward death. At this moment, his body seemed to have been divided into billions of extremely tiny parts, and the connection between these parts had been completely cut off. His entire body was no longer a whole body, and it was as if it was just a mechanical accumulation of billions of tiny parts. It seemed like his body would be instantly annihilated and turned into a pile of dust with just a slight touch. In his heart, Luo Fan knew that this was the most dangerous moment. If his will really dissipated, then his self in this universe would directly die. Even if his body still existed after this, could still maintain complete vitality, and his soul was still intact in his body, it would not be able to change this fate of death. Therefore, he used his incomparably firm will to frantically condense his own will, summoning the constantly dissipating will back from the void. He continuously condensed it in one place, once again condensing it into one body, becoming himself. That wave of power was so shocking, and it was not just a single wave like ordinary power. Once it was unleashed, it could only cause damage once. Instead, it was endless and almost inexhaustible. It entangled his will at all times, and no matter how he tried to condense his will, it would bombard his will again in the shortest time possible, continuously scattering his will. Although the power would weaken every time it was scattered, the weakening was so small that even Luo Fan could not sense it. Luo Fan's will was firm. No matter what the power was, he just kept summoning the will that was constantly being scattered, working hard to condense it into one, so that it could form his own will again, working hard to make his own will complete. This process was so long that one could not see the end of it. However, to Luo Fan, it was a process that he had no choice but to do. His path heart was extremely tough. During the process of this will being scattered and condensed, not only was there endless and almost unbearable pain, but there was also the feeling that he was constantly moving towards death, and the feeling that he could be destroyed at any time lingered in his heart, creating an indescribable terror. However, he did not waver at all. No matter how dangerous the situation was, he worked hard to condense his will, working hard to maintain the integrity of his will. In this seemingly endless wandering between life and death, some of the impurities and weaknesses in Luo Fan's were gradually broken and removed. Because of this, his willpower was constantly purified. It was like a piece of pig iron that was constantly being forged and tempered in a furnace. The originally intangible will gradually took on a blurry form during this process. It was not the shape of Luo Fan, but a strange existence that was crystal clear, like the most beautiful gemstones in the world. These existences filled every part of Luo Fan's body. Whether it was the depths of his spirit or the surface of his skin, His entire body was densely covered with their traces. It was a strange existence that no living being could grasp, but it was a real existence. This existence could not be traced, but it could control everything about living beings. It was born from the origin of life and represented the living being's true self. It was a first-class existence that was deeper than the soul or spirit of living beings and was more like the origin of life. If this living being lost its will, even if everything else was intact, it would just be a walking corpse, a puppet without a master. It could be said that the reason why living beings were called living beings was because of its will. This mysterious and unbelievable reality covered the inside and outside of the living being's body. It even spread out and covered everything that the living being could control, including the refined artifacts and incarnations. In this painful process of being refined, Luo Fan's body could not control itself, and it continued to fly towards the depths of the universe. As time passed, countless stardust was gradually drawn in and wrapped around him, causing his appearance to gradually change into a real meteorite that grew larger and larger. He flew in a straight line without any destination in the universe. During this process, the palm did not attack Luo Fan again. It only allowed Luo Fan to fly further and further away until he left the star system, passing through one star system after another, and finally rushed out of the Milky Way galaxy. It seemed as if he would never stop flying in the boundless void. In fact, at the moment when Luo Fan was slapped by the palm and shot out like a meteorite, the great Tao of the Earth's universe appeared out of thin air. Endless thunderbolts were generated out of thin air, directly enveloping the palm and bombarding it in an overwhelming manner. These thunderbolts were not ordinary thunderbolts. Instead, they were imbued with some unbelievable mysteries, containing the profoundness of destroying everything. They directly broke through the void and annihilated the existence of the origin of all matter, continuously bombarding the palm. The palm was extremely profound and contained unbelievable power. However, it could not retaliate against the endless thunderbolts and could only passively endure the bombardment of the endless thunderbolts. Although it was not truly injured, it could not break through the obstruction of the thunderbolts and continue to attack Luo Fan. It could only stay where it was and continuously resist the thunderbolts. Chapter 624. Novel. Chapter 664. Novel 100, 000 years. The galaxy regained its peace after that. If it were not for the fact that the galaxy had changed a lot compared to before and was almost beyond recognition, no one would think that something abnormal had happened here before. Time passed by slowly. 1 year, 10 years, 100 years. In the blink of an eye, 100,000 years had passed. 100,000 years was already an extremely long period of time for a civilization, but for the entire universe and the entire era, it was just a blink of an eye. After 100,000 years, the star system had regained its balance. Countless stardust gathered at the location of the dozen or so planets that had been crushed back then, forming a belt of meteorites that revolved around the star like a halo. The planet that Luo Fan's spiritual sense doppelganger had refined had also undergone great changes over the years. The atmosphere that had been thinned by the pillar of fire had been recondensed and returned to its original thickness. Moreover, because it was recondensed, there were many changes compared to the previous atmosphere. Unknowingly, there were many more components that were suitable for the birth of living beings. However, 100,000 years was still too short for the birth of living beings. Therefore, although the environment of the planet had changed a lot compared to before, no living beings had been born. The original 3 satellites of the planet had already become one. The trajectories of the 3 satellites had been changed by the black hole in space. After 100,000 years, this change in trajectory caused the 3 satellites to collide at a certain moment, collapse, and reform, turning into a satellite that was one size larger than any of the previous satellites. It continuously revolved around the planet. Of course, it was impossible for this satellite to contain all the matter of the 3 satellites. In fact, apart from the matter contained in the satellite that currently existed, most of the other matter fell into the planet. The remaining small part was thrown into the meteorite belt around the star due to the attraction of the star. This change made the planet more stable, and the changes on the planet, due to the influence of the satellite's gravity, became more concise. This day was one day after Luo Fan had been sent flying 10,000 years ago. Suddenly, somewhere in the galaxy, an indescribably strong attractive force was generated out of thin air, crazily attracting the endless free energy and all kinds of common or rare yuan qi in the void of the universe. The speed at which these energies condensed was astonishing. Even the space in the void showed faint traces under the impact of the friction of these countless energies, forming a faintly discernible vortex that surrounded a certain part of the star system. That was the location of the planet that Luo Fan had refined. At this moment, earth-shattering changes were occurring on the planet. The countless forces that gathered contained various water-based forces. After these water-based forces entered the planet's atmosphere, they caused some subtle changes to the planet's atmosphere. In an instant, countless amounts of water vapor began to condense in the clouds of the planet through various unimaginable methods. The speed at which it condensed was incomparably fast. In just a few hours, a huge dark cloud had formed that covered almost the entire surface of the planet. As time passed, the dark cloud grew thicker and thicker. In the end, a thunderclap shook the entire planet. The endless water vapor in the dark cloud was finally thick enough to break free, turning into monstrous rain that fell from the sky. The planet finally welcomed its first rain in billions of years since it was formed. The rain became heavier and heavier, covering the sky and covering the earth. It almost completely covered the entire surface of the planet. When living beings looked at the planet from the outside world, they could only see a thick black expanse and a boundless curtain of water. This planet was originally extremely dry, like an oven. In this torrential rain, the entire planet was like a creature that had been thirsty for countless years. It began to crazily absorb the rainwater, continuously fusing it into its body. The deepest part of its body began to become moist and satisfied. The rain seemed endless. It was long and endless, covering the sky and earth, making the entire planet seem as if it had been enveloped in this boundless curtain of rain since ancient times. This planet was 10 times larger than Earth, but it was far from being comparable to the only planet in the Kiliacosm galaxy. In just a year, the entire surface of the planet had been soaked in endless rain. Of course, this was only on the surface. The internal structure of the planet was simple yet complicated, rough yet mysterious. Rainwater was naturally unable to completely soak the entire planet. Although there was rainwater accumulating inside, it only gradually formed underground water. It did not affect the internal structure of the planet in the slightest. As the rain soaked the surface of the planet, the force that continuously drew the rainwater into the planet disappeared. The rainwater began to flow and accumulate on the surface of the planet. Following this change, some of the low-lying areas of the planet gradually formed lakes and rivers. It could be predicted that if the rain continued like this, there would be a day when the entire planet would become a boundless ocean. And this, even if the rain was so astonishing that it covered the sky and earth, could not be achieved in just 1 or 2 years. During this process, the attraction force produced by the entire planet towards the various powers did not weaken at all. Instead, it continued to strengthen. It looked as if some kind of huge and powerful creature was slowly waking up from its slumber, slowly moving its body and recovering its vitality. As the rivers and lakes gradually formed, other changes began to appear on the surface of the planet. Among the various powers that had gathered, some of the lightning attribute powers had finally accumulated to a limit. Streaks of them struck down from the dark clouds, covering the sky and earth. They were mixed in with the rain, causing the entire planet, which originally only had the sound of rushing water, to become extremely noisy. The rumbling sounds shook the heavens and earth. These bolts of lightning were different from the lightning that was formed from friction between the dark clouds. Back then, the bolts of lightning were formed from friction. They were essentially just a form of movement. At this moment, these bolts of lightning were condensed from boundless lightning attribute power. Finally, because they were too dense and there was too much of them, they turned from nothingness into reality. Finally, they struck down and appeared in the universe. These bolts of lightning were essentially a form of power. This power was extremely mysterious and contained endless vitality. It could cause the entire atmosphere of the planet and the surface of the planet to undergo all sorts of unimaginable changes, causing the world to gradually be filled with more and more vitality. The accumulation of the power of lightning was much more difficult than the power of water. Therefore, these bolts of lightning came in waves. When they accumulated to a certain level, they would start to explode and fall onto the surface of the planet. Some would shatter a mountain, some would open up a deep valley, some would evaporate a lake, and some would cause the substances in the lake to undergo some sort of strange combination. When this wave of lightning was emptied, it would start to accumulate again, waiting for the next explosion of power. At the same time, it would also give the planet a chance to digest the various changes caused by this wave of lightning. The speed at which the countless powers gathered on the planet became faster and faster. The time it took for the lightning to accumulate naturally became shorter and shorter. Therefore, the time between the waves of lightning also became shorter and shorter. At first, it would take an entire year to accumulate, but after 100 years, it would only take a few days for an overwhelming wave of lightning to be produced on the entire planet. After 100 years, more and more water sources appeared on the surface of the planet. Finally, many low-lying areas of the planet were connected, forming a medium-sized ocean. However, it finally formed an environment suitable for the birth of life. The birth of living things required vitality, power, opportunity, and stability. The huge changes that happened on the surface of the planet in the past 100 years were not only because of the endless rain and lightning, but also because of the intense changes caused by the condensation of various other powers. The power of water condensed, producing endless rain. The power of lightning condensed, producing endless vitality and endless destruction. The power of earth condensed, adding many substances that originally did not exist on the inside of the planet. The power of metal condensed, adding many metals that originally did not exist on the inside of the planet, causing the magnetic poles of the planet to continuously strengthen. Wind attribute, wood attribute, fire attribute. The condensation of any kind of power would cause some kind of change to the planet. Some of these changes were beneficial to the birth of life, but some would cause indescribable damage to the birth of life. Therefore, even if there were embryonic life forms on the surface of the planet, it would be difficult for them to grow, truly take shape, and truly reproduce. Only a stable environment suitable for the birth of life could allow the embryonic life forms to have enough time to grow after they were born and truly reproduce. Even a lake would find it difficult to provide such a stable environment. After all, the changes on the surface of the planet were too intense. The lake was still too small, and it could easily be stirred by the changes. It could even completely disappear. How could it provide a stable environment? Only the appearance of the ocean could provide such a stable environment. The ocean was countless times larger than a lake. Even the ocean that had just appeared on the surface of the planet occupied 1,000th of the surface of the planet. Such a large area was naturally insignificant compared to the entire planet, but it was enough to resist the changes in the outside world. It could allow the depths of the ocean to remain in an unchanging and stable environment, making it difficult for the outside world to truly affect the depths of the ocean no matter what. And this was the most suitable environment for the birth of life. However, the environment was suitable. After all, it was only an environment. Truly giving birth to life required great opportunities and a long wait. If the changes on the planet stopped, it would take at least millions of years or tens of millions of years for life to truly be born in the depths of the ocean. However, it was clear that the changes on the surface of the planet could not stop. Instead, they continued to accelerate and strengthen as time passed. And this caused the time needed for the birth of life in the depths of the ocean to continuously shrink. In just a short 100 years, the most primitive single-celled life was finally born in the depths of the ocean after a shocking lightning strike. The moment this life was born, the entire planet suddenly shook. It was as if an invisible wall had suddenly turned around, as if the entire planet had come to life in an instant. Following this change, the dark clouds that covered the surface of the entire planet were instantly blown away by an invisible force. In an instant, they completely collapsed and turned into endless water vapor that integrated into every inch of the entire planet's atmosphere. The entire planet was instantly enveloped in an unimaginably dense fog. The lightning that was originally covering the sky and earth turned into countless tiny electric arcs in an instant, and together with the fog, they enveloped the entire surface of the planet. Similarly, the various other types of power also underwent similar changes. They all seemed to have dispersed in an instant. The attraction force generated by the entire planet skyrocketed by countless times in an instant. The originally blurry and faintly discernible vortex that appeared around the planet had now condensed into a true form. The huge vortex turned the planet into a black hole. It even began to attract the meteorite belts around the star, causing many small meteorites to float towards the planet. They were about to enter the vortex and rush straight into the planet through the vortex. This vortex was so astonishing that the amount of energy and power that it gathered was naturally earth-shattering. However, these powers were no longer piled up on the surface of the planet like before. Instead, they began to rush straight into the planet through some extremely mysterious channel. After passing through layers of strange changes, they fused into a certain location in the center of the planet. The fusion of these powers caused the interior of the planet to gradually undergo inexplicable changes. The entire planet began to tremble slightly, as if some kind of living being was shaking its body. The central star constantly emitted boundless light and heat. After 200 years of changes, because of the endless dark clouds covering it, the temperature on the surface of the planet had dropped a lot compared to before. Although it was still around 100 degrees Celsius in the secular unit, it was still not suitable for ordinary people to survive. However, it was enough for some living beings with stronger heat resistance to survive. At this moment, without the cover of the dark clouds, sunlight shone directly into the surface of the planet. The heat generated was naturally unimaginable. Under this heat, the fog that filled the surface of the planet began to gradually evaporate, condensing into dark clouds in the atmosphere again. However, these dark clouds were formed because of the sunlight and the evaporation of water vapor. Naturally, they could not be evenly distributed. The dark clouds that were formed were not as overwhelming as before, directly covering the entire surface of the planet. Instead, they came in patches and patches. Some places were not covered by clouds at all, and some places were covered by dark clouds that were as dark as ink covering the sky and the sun. Among them, there was a huge dividing line that divided the entire planet into two sides. On the side facing the star, dark clouds appeared in most places, while on the side facing the star, the fog dissipated very little. However, due to the change in the atmosphere, a lot of the fog at the border flowed towards the side where the sun shone, causing the fog to gradually thin. When the dark clouds accumulated to a certain extent, they naturally turned into rain and fell, and there was even the rumbling of thunder. However, these were only natural phenomena. They were no longer condensed from the power of water in the past. Instead, they were emitted by the heat of the sun, and they had already turned into natural weather. These were no longer interrupted. The power that had completely dispersed the endless dark clouds around the entire planet no longer appeared, allowing these evolutions to continue. On the surface of the planet, the area of the ocean had increased to nearly 1/20th of the planet, which was more than 50 times larger than the 1,000th of the original. However, it made the planet even more beautiful. So it's been as long as 100,000 years. At this moment, a faint sigh spread throughout the entire planet. This sigh seemed to be formed by the combination of every mountain rock, every bit of soil, every drop of rain, and every bit of power on the planet. It was as if the entire planet itself was sighing. With this sigh, the planet slightly distorted, and a crystal-clear light drilled out from a mountain peak, condensing into the phantom of a giant that was tens of thousands of feet tall in the void. This giant phantom was extremely huge, but its figure was very illusory. There was no power inside it, and it seemed to be purely condensed from will. Looking at the appearance of this giant, it was impressively Luo Fan. This giant was obviously the manifestation of the will of Luo Fan's spiritual doppelganger that had merged with the planet. At this moment, after more than 100,000 years of improvement, Luo Fan's spiritual doppelganger had completely refined the planet and reached the level of perfectly driving the entire planet. At this moment, the planet was his body, and his body was the planet. Because of this change, Luo Fans will naturally merged with the will of the planet, and naturally grew to a shocking level. This growth made it even more troublesome for him to compress and condense his will. Although he could still directly compress his body to the size of a normal human, it was too troublesome. It was easier and more convenient to compress his body to its current height of 10,000 feet. Although his body of 10,000 feet was huge compared to the average scale, it was extremely small compared to the scale of this planet. It could even be said to be insignificant. Therefore, the image that Luo Fans will manifested at this moment was so tall. Moreover, because although the will of the planet was huge, it was somewhat scattered, so when Luo Fans will merged with it, it naturally became somewhat scattered as well. This caused the manifestation of the will that was tens of thousands of feet tall to appear so illusory. Chapter 6:25. Essence, I didn't expect it to take 100,000 years, Luo Fan thought. He understood how long it had been since he had merged with the planet. After understanding, he raised his hand and grabbed. The space in front of him twisted slightly, and a vague whirlpool suddenly formed. The whirlpool was mysterious and gave off an indescribable attractive force. The attractive force was very mysterious. It did not affect any matter, power, or yuan qi in the surroundings at all. It did not even disturb the flow of air in the surroundings. It was as if a strange whirlpool-shaped matter had suddenly appeared here. However, the attractive force was real. This force of attraction directly merged into the void, and through some kind of incomparably mysterious channel, it directly spread to the endless distance, directly acting on an unknown existence far away from this place. With the effect of the attractive force, there seemed to be an existence that was crossing space at an unimaginable speed and was about to descend on the planet. Luo Fan's towering willpower body stood in the void like a giant supporting the sky. His body naturally emitted a powerful aura that could support the heavens and the earth. Standing on a mountain peak, even if his height couldn't suppress the mountain peak, the aura he emitted made the mountain peak seem incomparably small, as if it had become a mound of dirt under his feet. He stood there and looked into the void. It was as if he could see through the barriers of the endless space and see a place that was infinitely far away. It's been 100,000 years. I didn't expect that force to still not disappear after 100,000 years. It's a pity that I'm only a spiritual doppelganger, and I only cultivate the mysteries brought about by that force. I'm not the incarnation that cultivates the innate golden core, so I can't sense who is attacking me through the karma connection. Luo Fan sighed to himself. What he summoned with the help of the mysterious whirlpool was his clone that cultivated the innate golden core. Of course, it could not be anything else. In the past 100,000 years, his clone could not move at all. It was constantly being eroded by that force. Although it continuously wore down that force and purified it to an unimaginable level, to the point where it could not be damaged no matter how much it eroded and destroyed, it still could not completely break through that force. It could not get rid of it. It could only drift towards the depths of the void like a meteorite under the effect of that force. At this moment, It had already left the river system and gone to the depths of the void tens of thousands of light years away. Even though Luo Fan used the mysterious force produced by the whirlpool to pull the meteorite back at an unimaginable speed, it was still impossible for it to cross the distance that it had traversed in the past 100,000 years in a short period of time. Therefore, Luo Fan was not in a hurry. After he sighed, he took a step forward. The will incarnation had already traversed more than half of the planet and arrived at the depths of the planet's ocean, where the first creature was born. Although the planet now had an ocean. However, the seawater in the ocean was not as clear as the seawater that Luo Fan had seen in the Child Mother Galaxy on Earth. The seawater on the planet was muddy. If the entire ocean was not so vast, one would even suspect that it was a sewage pool filled with mud and dirty water. The ocean contained almost all the substances that could be found on the planet. However, these substances were completely dissolved in the seawater, and they were distributed in various locations and depths of the ocean according to some rules. It was also because of this distribution that the various substances on the planet were able to mix to the greatest extent, displaying the most possible combinations. In the end, under the lightning that contained boundless vitality and the various other forces that promoted the evolution of life, life was born, giving birth to the first life on this planet since it was born. When Luo Fan arrived, his body turned into nothingness with a thought. It was as if his entire body had entered another space, leaving only a trace of his figure in the seawater. The reason he could appear in the depths of the ocean so mysteriously was because he did not want to disturb the fragile environment where life could be born. The reason he could do this so easily was because the planet was equivalent to his body. Everything inside and outside the planet was under his absolute control. If that was not the case, although he could also do this with other methods, he would need to use some power or even some divine abilities. It would definitely be difficult for him to do it so easily. Luo Fan stood there. With a thought, he locked onto the newly born single-celled life in front of him. This life could not even be considered a life at the moment. It did not have any consciousness or consciousness. Even its body was so small that people would easily ignore it. Only the indescribable life force fluctuations coming from it could confirm that it was a living being. Looking at this life that could not be called a life, Luo Fan could not help but sigh inwardly. This life, which would give birth to countless kinds of life in the future, might even give birth to powerful cultivators who could casually destroy stars and the void. At this moment, it was so weak, so simple, and so crude. He only needed to raise his hand and slap it. Without using any power or relying on the absolute control that came with the body of the planet, he could wipe out this life and directly cut off the possibility of this life giving birth to countless kinds of life in the future. He would completely change the kind of life born on this planet in the future, directly turning the development of life on this planet in a different direction. With this thought, he suddenly felt that the weak, simple, and crude life in front of him was like the one that gave birth to 2, 3, and all things at the beginning of the world. The weak wave of life also seemed to reveal the profundities of the beginning, as if it contained the most fundamental profundities of all life. With a thought, Luo Fan decided to stop here and quietly watch how this life evolved and reproduced. After making up his mind, he directly sat down with his legs crossed and closed his eyes. He circulated his will, preparing to refine the incarnation of the will that had gathered from the entire planet. In terms of power alone, the incarnation of the will was so powerful that it could not be described with words. This could be seen from how Luo Fan found it slightly strenuous to compress it to a height of 100,000 meters. However, as mentioned before, because this was gathered from all over the planet, it had not been refined before, so it was very scattered. If that was not the case, the body formed from such a huge amount of will would not be somewhat illusory, and it would not have truly become corporeal. Although Luo Fan intended to stay here and watch the evolution and reproduction of this creature, it could be imagined that this process would be extremely long and boring. Naturally, he would not waste his precious time. He just stared at this creature with his eyes wide open, waiting for it to change. Moreover, With his cultivation and realm, the amount of mental energy he needed to manage the evolution and reproduction process of the creature was extremely little. As such, he planned to refine the will that had gathered from all over the planet while he observed, so that the power of the will could be greatly increased. To Luo Fan, he had as many methods to refine his will as he wanted. As such, he did not need to think too much. After refining his will, there was a sudden bang where the heart of the incarnation was, and a chaotic green flame ignited. Once the green flame was ignited, it instantly expanded and enveloped his incarnation that was hundreds of thousands of meters tall. In this flame, Luo Fan's expression didn't change in the slightest, but his whole body gradually turned red, gradually melted, and gradually became illusory. It was as if he was constantly being burned and melted by this flame. At this moment, Luo Fan's incarnation shook, and strands of strange patterns directly formed in his body. They began to guide these flames to circulate in his body according to some mysterious path. As the flames circulated, strands of black fog gradually drifted away from the flames like black smoke. As the black smoke drifted away, Luo Fan's body seemed to undergo some extremely weak but profound change. It seemed to become more crystalline and transparent. Time passed slowly. After Luo Fan entered the depths of the ocean and observed the evolution and reproduction of living beings while refining his will, the entire planet entered a gradual process of change. This process was not as earth-shattering as the previous 200 years, but it was not small either. Rain would fall from the sky almost every once in a while, and lightning would strike the surface of the entire planet, shattering mountains, opening up lakes, and opening up rivers. There were also all sorts of strange gales, and all sorts of strange gases were naturally born, constantly enriching the planet's atmosphere. Amidst these changes, the environment of the planet also gradually changed. Countless clouds formed, and all sorts of changes that carried away heat kept happening, causing the temperature of the planet to gradually drop. From a place that was originally only suitable for a few living beings that could adapt to high temperatures, it gradually became suitable for ordinary living beings. The area of the ocean kept increasing, and the environment of the land was also gradually changing. All sorts of substances that were not suitable for living beings gradually sank into the depths of the earth. The entire planet was transforming into a living planet at an unimaginable speed. At the bottom of the ocean where Luo Fan's incarnation was, the first living beings that were born in the beginning were reproducing at an unimaginable speed. It was as if they would die in a few seconds. Just like that, it only took a few decades for the entire ocean to be filled with these extremely weak, extremely simple, and extremely crude living beings. In terms of numbers, there were probably trillions of them. These living beings were so weak, simple, and crude that they were naturally extremely sensitive to changes in the environment. When the location and the environment changed, these living beings would naturally undergo some kind of change. These changes were extremely diverse. Some could make the survival ability of living beings stronger. Some could make the survival ability of living beings weaker. Some could make living beings more complicated. And some could make living beings simpler. There were many such changes. However, no matter what the changes were, more and more living beings that were completely different from the original primeval life forms were naturally born. Among these numerous living beings, the living beings that were suitable for living would naturally be preserved, while the unsuitable ones would naturally be eliminated. As a result, the living beings in the ocean became more and more complex, more and more delicate, and more suitable for the changes in the environment. One day, after Luo Fan had started to refine his will, his body suddenly trembled. The chaotic flame that had been burning inside and outside his body for the past 100 years suddenly trembled and instantly expanded by 10,000 times. It directly covered Luo Fan's body completely, and the people outside could not even see the outline of Luo Fan's body within it. At the same time, The black fog that floated out of the flame also increased by countless times. It was like billowing smoke that shot into the sky, constantly twisting and entangling in the void, forming countless strange shapes. Earth, water, fire, wind, metal, wood, earth, thunder, mountains, swamps. Almost everything that existed inside and outside the planet seemed to be able to be found in the twisting and changing black fog. The black fog changed into various shapes, gradually increasing in size and gradually thinning out. In the end, it completely dissipated and integrated into the planet's atmospheric cycle and vitality cycle, causing the planet's atmosphere and vitality to undergo some kind of inexplicable change. It was as if some kind of imprint was gradually being branded. This process lasted for a total of 10 days and 10 nights. After 10 days and 10 nights, the void shook, and a soundless thunderous roar instantly erupted from the center of the flame. It shook the void, the vitality of the entire planet, and the atmosphere of the entire planet, causing countless hurricanes to suddenly appear on the entire planet. Countless vitality fluctuations formed a vitality torrent. However, all these changes around Luo Fan and the seawater around the flame were not affected at all. It was as if these changes had all occurred in another world, another plane, and another space. After the thunderous roar, the flame immediately disappeared. A translucent figure that was 30 meters tall and made up of tiny and dense particles that were the size of a speck of dust appeared. This figure was so profound. Even though it was constructed from the accumulation of countless particles, it emanated a profound aura that was extremely refined, pure, and seamless. As he sat there, he seemed to be the master of the entire world, the entire universe, and the entire void. It was as if as long as his gaze and thoughts could reach, everything would be completely under his control. It was as if the world, the universe, and the void had to submit to this figure and could not resist him at all. This figure was naturally the incarnation of Luo Fan's will. After 100 years of refinement, Luo Fan had already refined the will that was gathered from the entire planet to the peak of his purity. All the impurities that he could sense within it had been completely removed by him. The originally scattered will had been completely condensed into an extremely condensed entity that could not be separated by any power. At this moment, there were definitely still impurities within the will incarnation, and there were definitely places that were scattered. However, that was only for existences with higher cultivation realms. To the current Luo Fan, the will incarnation was a supreme existence that could not be any more perfect. This was because he had already refined it to the limits of what he could do and what he could sense. Luo Fan slowly opened his eyes. There seemed to be countless rays of light flashing in his eyes, as if there was endless intelligence flowing within them. His eyes swept across the surroundings, and the surrounding seawater instantly became gentle and calm. It was as if some existence had completely replaced the natural laws that originally controlled them. He raised his eyes and looked down. The mud below suddenly began to fluctuate according to his gaze, creating circles and circles of ripples. It was as if the mud was breathing along with his breathing. With a slight thought, without any movement or technique, the mud below naturally condensed into all kinds of strange beasts. They were vivid and lifelike, and even revealed traces of vitality. Bits and pieces of spiritual consciousness seemed to have truly turned into living creatures condensed from the mud. With a thought, the surrounding seawater suddenly shook and similarly condensed into countless strange beasts. There were even various interactions with the strange beasts formed from the mud, as if they were naturally born living beings. So, when one's will is strong to a certain extent, there can actually be such mysteries. Luo Fan experimented and could not help but sigh. At this moment, all the changes in the sludge and seawater did not rely on any of his power, nor did they make use of the convenience of the planet as his main body. In other words, even if they appeared on another planet, another part of the starry sky, another part of the sea, or another piece of sludge, their performance would not be any different from before. Because all these changes came from his will, it was his will. The instant he looked at the mud and seawater, he directly made the seawater naturally submit to his will. It naturally changed itself to cater to his will, and even did not hesitate to form spiritual consciousness. Of course, if one said that it submitted, it was only on the surface. If one analyzed it carefully, it was because his will had already reached an unimaginable level, so strong that it surpassed a certain boundary. This caused the mud and seawater that he looked at to naturally be infected by his will and could naturally change according to his will. It naturally changed its form and even formed the previous manifestation of spiritual consciousness. The so-called submission in the human world was essentially no different from this, so it was called submission. This substance changed according to his will, and it was even faster, smoother, and more agile than the body changing according to his will. The mysteries were simply indescribable with words. Chapter 665, Essence Chapter 665. Chapter 626. Get out of trouble after experimenting for a while. Luo Fan's thoughts flickered, dispersing his control over the seawater and the silt. Search for the latest updates here. He lifted his eyes and glanced around. Everything in the entire sea was taken into his senses. The process of the primeval creature's reproduction flashed quickly in his mind. The process of the primeval creature's reproduction was, of course, monotonous and boring to the point that it could make people collapse. However, if one put everything together, he could vaguely see a vague principle controlling everything. It guided the primeval creature's evolution and reproduction, making the lives in the sea evolve in a certain direction. This law was so obscure and mysterious that even though Luo Fan could faintly perceive it, he was completely unable to see it clearly, let alone comprehend it. He could only faintly feel that there was some kind of indescribable mystery within it. If he could comprehend it, he feared that he would obtain unimaginable achievements. However, it was extremely difficult to comprehend this law, and it had reached an unimaginable level. According to Luo Fan's deduction, he was afraid that he would have to wait until the life on this planet had developed to the extreme, then decline, and finally die. Only then would he be able to comprehend this law a little bit. And if he wanted to comprehend it, he would have to repeat this process countless of millions of times. Moreover, the process of every single life from birth to death required at least a few billion years. At this point, it could be confirmed that with Luo Fan's current cultivation, it was already impossible for him to truly comprehend this law and obtain accomplishments that exceeded his imagination. Understanding this, Luo Fan sighed. With a move of his body, he lifted his foot and took a step forward. He had already left the ocean and appeared on the mountain that he had appeared on in the beginning. This place was not much different from 100 years ago. The mountain was still barren, but there were more rocks and more kinds of materials in the rocks. Above the mountain peak, the faintly discernible vortex was still rotating at a steady pace. The mysterious suction force was still being exerted, constantly pulling the meteorite that was tens of thousands of light years away. Looking at the whirlpool, Luo Fan's eyes flashed with wisdom. 100 years ago, this whirlpool was the strongest whirlpool he could build. It was the limit of what he could do. However, after 100 years of constant tempering of his will had surpassed a certain limit and finally possessed unimaginable power. He had discovered many of the vortex's weaknesses and found many areas that could be improved upon in the way the vortex was constructed. As long as he had it, it would be an extremely simple matter for a cultivator like Luo Fan to improve his cultivation. Luo Fan's will moved. In a flash, he had the whirlpool under his absolute control. As the whirlpool came under his control, a feeling that the whirlpool had become more compatible with his will than his own body surged into his mind. With just a thought, the whirlpool reacted at an unimaginable speed, producing some sort of transformation that matched his thoughts. Feeling the feedback that was more flexible and faster than his body, Luo Fan couldn't help but smile. With a thought, the whirlpool began to change in a strange way. This change did not just speed up the whirlpool's rotation. Instead, it gradually slowed down. When it finally stabilized, the whirlpool's speed was less than 1/100th of its previous speed. However, the rhythm, frequency, and trajectory of the vortex's rotation had undergone an earth-shattering change. It seemed to have gained a mysterious and indescribable aura, and it seemed to be even more compatible with the laws of the world. With this change, the extremely mysterious suction force produced by the whirlpool, which did not affect anything in the surroundings but had an effect on the meteorite that was countless light years away, increased by more than 10,000 times. The appearance of this suction force caused the distant meteorite to shake violently. It instantly turned into a stream of light and shot straight toward this galaxy. Originally, the speed of the meteor was already unimaginably fast. Now that its speed skyrocketed, it directly broke through the speed limit of the Earth's universe. It broke through the void, causing the meteor to flicker as it flew, as if it was teleporting. This change caused the speed at which the meteor flew towards the star system was more than 10,000 times faster than it had been before. In just a few days, it had traveled through an unknown number of light years and directly arrived in the galaxy where Luo Fan's spiritual sense clone was located. The meteorite was so fast that the impact it produced was unimaginable. The moment it rushed into the galaxy, every planet, every satellite, and even the huge star in the center of the galaxy trembled violently. The tremors were so strong that the topography of almost every star underwent earth-shattering changes. Countless meteorites in the asteroid belts around the star shattered, causing the number of meteorites to soar. Boom! With an earth-shattering roar, the meteorite directly broke through the atmosphere of the planet where Luo Fan's spiritual sense doppelganger had merged with, passed through the thick atmosphere, and directly rushed into the vortex at the top of the mountain. The meteorite was pulled in by the extremely strong suction force of the vortex. Even though there were many gravitational sources in the galaxy, which could produce hundreds of powerful suction forces, they could not change its trajectory. Even the planet where the spiritual sense clone was located could not make the meteorite fall to the ground after it entered the atmosphere. Under the effect of the suction force, the meteorite broke through the void and rushed into the vortex without directly colliding with the planet. The impact on the planet was only stirring up its atmosphere. It was only the strong fluctuations produced by the shock wave that caused some kind of vibration on the planet. Even though the vibration was so shocking that it directly turned the mountain into powder and even caused a huge pit of tens of thousands of miles under the mountain, and even caused magma to gush out from the bottom of the pit, the damage was negligible compared to directly colliding with the planet. It's a pity that I overestimated the impact of the shock wave. Standing under the vortex, Luo Fan smiled and sighed. With a slight thought, the ground under his control began to squirm like a living thing. It seemed to have turned into a magnificent army, rushing towards the center from all directions. In the blink of an eye, the pit was completely filled up, forming a plain with a radius of tens of thousands of miles. After the plain was formed, Luo Fan cast his gaze towards the vortex. This vortex was extremely profound, and it moved according to one's will. After Luo Fan changed it earlier, an extremely vast space had been opened up within the vortex. This void was not stable, and it was only comparable to the void of Earth's universe. However, it was boundless and could contain everything in the world. Even if the entire galaxy was to be stored in it, it would not take up even a millionth of this void. Of course, if he wanted to store the entire galaxy, Luo Fan had to be able to lift it up. The vortex could not move. If he could not lift up the entire galaxy, how could he store it? Therefore, although the void was boundless, its practicality was quite limited. At least for Luo Fan's current cultivation realm, it was not very practical. At this moment, the meteorite that contained his innate gold core cultivation technique was constantly moving in circles in the boundless void. Under Luo Fan's control, there was a strong resistance acting on the meteorite in the void, causing the speed of the meteorite to continuously slow down as it continued to move. The meteorite had been flying in the void for more than 100,000 years, attracting the stardust in the void to join it at every moment. More than 100,000 years was enough for the meteorite to grow to the size of the moon. For such a huge meteorite to fly at a speed that could even break through the void, one could imagine the strength of its impact. It was obvious how difficult it was to slow it down until it came to a stop, and it was obvious how difficult it was without much thought. Fortunately, after it entered the whirlpool, the suction force that the whirlpool emitted, which could cause this meteorite to fly back from an unknown number of light years away, had already disappeared without a trace. Although this meteorite was fast, it was only due to inertia. Under that resistance, its speed continued to decrease. After 10 days and 10 nights, its speed finally decreased to a speed that surpassed the speed of sound by 100 times. To Luo Fan, such a speed was no different from stopping. Therefore, with a single thought from Luo Fan, the entire planet trembled slightly. An indescribable suction force suddenly gathered in one spot and charged into the vortex. It passed through the endless void and directly acted on the meteorite. The meteorite was already suffering from all kinds of resistance force, and its speed was constantly decreasing. Suddenly, it was affected by the indescribable suction force. It suddenly paused, shook, and began to spin wildly in the void. Standing outside the vortex, Luo Fan's eyes flickered with infinite wisdom. He raised his hand and grabbed at the void. The invisible suction force was like a sword in his hand, and it began to change as he moved. It began to move and began to act on the meteorite in a very special and mysterious way. After 100,000 years, the stardust that formed the meteorite had already condensed to an unimaginable degree. It had even fused with the force that had bombarded Luo Fan. Its sturdiness was something that even a diamond couldn't compare to. It was precisely such a sturdy meteorite that it was able to maintain its integrity amidst its swift speed, and it was even to the extent that it wasn't damaged in the slightest when it emanated a shockwave that could annihilate a mountain. However, such a meteorite seemed like tofu that was cut by a scalpel before the force formed from the gravitational force of the entire planet. The meteorites on it shot out in all directions, and they ceaselessly shrunk at a visible speed before ceaselessly falling apart. The gravitational force of a star was so strong that it could even make a peerlessly enormous satellite revolve around it. At this moment, it had been condensed to the size of the tip of a needle, and its destructive force was obvious. It was even possible for it to pierce through space and annihilate golden immortals. If it wasn't for Luo Fan tempering his will to such an extent that it exceeded his limits, it would be utterly impossible for him to compress the gravitational force to such an extent, and it was even to the extent that compressing the gravitational force to an area of 300 m was almost impossible. The stardust had already fused with the energy that raged within Luo Fan's body. During the process of using the gravitational force to sculpt the meteorite, it was naturally sculpting that energy as well, causing strands of energy to leave the meteorite at every single moment and gradually disperse into space. It ceaselessly warped and raged, and it was even to the extent that it gathered the stardust to form various extremely strange forms. It seemed like rocks, living beings, beasts. However, even though this energy was tough and of high quality, it was extremely small in quantity after all, and it was unable to resist the energy that naturally existed in space. Even though it was able to rage for a long time, it was still slowly eliminated in the end and completely vanished, causing the stardust to finally lose its vitality and disperse once more. Time passed slowly. In the blink of an eye, another few months had passed. After a few months, the meteorite that was originally the size of a moon had already been sculpted into a 30-meter-tall human figure by the gravitational needle. This human figure lay horizontally in space. Its appearance was similar to that of Luo Fan, and even the pores on its face were incomparably clear. Even though the energy had fused with the surrounding stardust to form the meteorite, its original goal was to erase Luo Fan, so most of its energy was naturally concentrated on Luo Fan's body. At most, it had expanded to a radius of a few meters around Luo Fan. As a result, The energy within a radius of a few meters around Luo Fan's body was many times stronger than the energy in the outside world. The difficulty of getting rid of it was naturally much more difficult than the other stardust. It was precisely because of this that Luo Fan had unknowingly formed the human-shaped sculpture lying horizontally in the direction of the barrier that had suddenly increased in difficulty as he continued to sculpt the meteorite. After sculpting to such an extent, the combination of the inside and the outside should be able to get rid of this energy. Such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. His main body in the meteorite had not lost his perception of the outside world. He was very clear about all the experiences of this spiritual avatar that had fused with the planet over the years. It could even be said that all of this was under his control and arrangement. However, because he was entangled by that energy and suppressed by the endless stardust around him, he could not move or use his energy, so he could not get rid of it. In this rare opportunity, Luo Fan did not need to communicate with the outside world. They each operated their respective means in an incomparably perfect way. The spiritual avatar in the outside world concentrated all the gravitational force of the entire planet, and even all the gravitational force of the central star on the planet, into one spot. Like an awl, it directly pierced into the top of the sculpture's head. Although this gravitational force had condensed into an awl, it seemed to be scattered and not condensed enough compared to the previously condensed needles. It seemed that its power had been greatly reduced, and it could not break through the more powerful stardust. But that was just the appearance. Don't forget that this gravitational awl was condensed with the gravitational force of the sun acting on the planet. The sun was millions of times larger than the planet. Even if the gravitational force it produced was only directed at the planet, it was definitely countless times stronger than the gravitational force produced by the planet itself. With such a strong gravitational force concentrated in one spot, although the volume formed was much larger than the previous needles, its power was thousands of times stronger than the previous needles. Suddenly, the attack came crashing down, and the human-shaped statue that was lying on the ground shook violently. In an instant, countless cracks appeared and densely wrapped around the statue. At the same time, waves of unparalleled power erupted from inside the sculpture. It was as if hundreds of millions of nuclear bombs had suddenly exploded inside it, producing an indescribably powerful explosive force. It directly blasted the sculpture that had countless cracks, causing the sculpture to instantly shatter into countless fragments. It even tore open the void and directly broke open the vortex, causing the void inside the vortex to collapse and scatter in all directions. Luo Fan had originally condensed and guided the planet into the vortex due to the gravitational force exerted on it by the central star. After losing the gravitational force, the planet was about to fly straight in the direction of its original revolution and leave its original trajectory. The explosion caused by the explosion of the vortex happened at this moment, but it produced an earth-shattering impact that directly collided with the planet. At the same time, a huge crater of hundreds of meters deep was formed on the newly formed plane below. At the same time, the inertia of flying straight away was instantly offset, allowing the planet to maintain its original orbit. When the explosive force disappeared, Luo Fan had already dispersed the gravitational awl and reloaded the gravitational force of the sun onto the planet, allowing the planet to be subjected to the gravitational force of the central star again and eliminating the hidden danger of it deviating from its orbit. In the midst of the explosion, a figure wrapped in a sparkling brilliance, as if made of some strange crystal, rushed out of the vortex. In an instant, the entire planet, as well as the void within tens of millions of miles around the planet, were radiated by this will. Within the range of this will, everything seemed to submit to this will. It seemed that as long as this will moved, the void could be shattered, and the laws of nature could be changed. Everything within the range of this will seemed to be subservient to this will. It was as if everything could be reversed, space could be shattered, and the laws of nature could be changed with a single thought from this will. This will was tens of thousands of times stronger than the will refined by Luo Fan's spiritual sense doppelganger. It even made the will tempered by Luo Fan's spiritual sense doppelganger seem as weak as an ant. When this figure appeared, there were all kinds of indescribable vibrations in the void. There seemed to be some kind of mysterious power beginning to condense in the void above his head. An indescribably terrifying aura gradually emitted from it, as if some kind of astonishing existence was forming there. It seemed that when that existence was truly formed, it would cause shocking destruction. Chapter 666. Escape. Chapter 666. Escape. Chapter 627. Novel type. Chapter 667. Gathering of 3 as 5 cheese collecting in one's head. This figure was naturally Luo Fan, who had been enveloped by the power for 100,000 years. At this time, Luo Fan was suspended in the void. His entire body was sparkling and translucent. It was as if his entire body was made of crystals that were millions of times harder than diamonds. Each crystal was exuding an aura that seemed indestructible and indestructible. Each of these crystals was a strand of wool crystal that had broken through the limit, turning illusory into real, and was born from the original illusory nothingness. They were the results of Luo Fan's will in the past 100,000 years by using that power to purify his own will. That power had entangled Luo Fan for more than 100,000 years, but it was still worn down by less than 1%. How could its destructive power to the will and the ability to purify it be comparable to that of the spiritual sense doppelganger, which had been refined by the mysterious flame for a short 100 years? Because of this, the will of the original body could reach such a level, which was tens of thousands of times stronger than the pure will of the spiritual sense doppelganger. As mentioned before, the will that was refined by Luo Fan's spiritual sense doppelganger had reached the limit of what he could perceive. In other words, the level of the pure will of the spiritual sense doppelganger had reached the peak of Luo Fan's current cultivation realm. If it was 10,000 times purer than this peak, it was equivalent to breaking through Luo Fan's cultivation realm by more than 10,000 times. On the other hand, Luo Fan's own cultivation had already reached the peak of the primordial gold rank, and he was only a step away from attaining the golden immortal Tao fruit. To this incarnation of his in the Earth universe, he was only a step away from attaining the cultivation of a golden immortal. Increasing it by 10,000 times from this foundation had faintly broken a certain limit. It allowed Luo Fan to break through the barrier of that power. When he reappeared in the Earth's universe, it caused a reaction from the great Tao in the Earth's universe. At this moment, the power condensing in the void above his head was similar to the heavenly tribulation. This was a power unique to the Earth and the universe itself, a power that could destroy everything. The reason why this power appeared was not because a cultivator had the willpower of Luo Fan, but because Luo Fan had a willpower that far surpassed his own cultivation level. If Luo Fan possessed a cultivation realm that was compatible with this will, then he would naturally be able to attain the cultivation realm of the innate golden immortal realm, and he would naturally be able to perfectly fuse with the Grand Tao. Thus, it would naturally be impossible for such a force to arise and annihilate him. But Luo Fan did not have that level of attainment. The appearance of this will caused an indescribable impact on the great Tao of the entire Earth and universe. This impact was formed by the will's instinctive desire to obtain the corresponding cultivation realm. It was the will's instinctive desire to obtain the endless mysteries of the great Tao from the great Tao in order to increase its cultivation realm. How could such actions not cause backlash from the Grand Tao? How could it not cause the supreme power of the Earth and universe to gather to wipe him out? This was the most powerful danger he had encountered since he came to the Earth. But at the same time, it was also an opportunity. A supreme opportunity that could allow him to directly comprehend the mysteries of the Grand Luo and directly obtain a qualitative improvement in his cultivation realm. As long as Luo Fan could survive the annihilation of this power, he he would be able to directly obtain the mysteries of the Grand Luo from the Great Tao, allowing him to directly become a Khanate golden immortal realm cultivator, and even allow his main body in the primordial world to directly attain the Tao fruit of the Grand Luo. At this moment, Luo Fan's willpower had reached a point where even that power could not shake it. There was naturally no need to mention how brilliant his wisdom was. In just a blink of an eye, he had already understood all of the above. He could not help but reveal a faint smile on his face. He was not afraid of danger at all. After all, at this moment, it was only a clone of his in the earth. So what if it was killed? At most, he would send another clone into the earth. Although that would consume an extremely large amount of magic power, it was not a loss that could not be made up for. Since he was not afraid of this danger, then what was meaningful to him was naturally the opportunity that came with the danger. Under such circumstances, how could Luo Fan not feel happy? As for Earth's cosmos, it might be even more profound and complicated than he had imagined. His clone in Earth's cosmos might have even more uses, but in front of the mysteries of Zenith Heaven, all of that was secondary. As long as he could comprehend the mysteries of Zenith Heaven, he wouldn't feel the slightest bit of reluctance to give up everything. With a slight smile, he raised his head and looked at the power that was continuously condensing, vibrating, and emitting all sorts of terrifying auras in the void above his head. After weighing it in his heart, he knew that this power was simply too powerful. Even the Earth's universe could not easily condense it. Therefore, it would take at least 3 years before it could finally condense in a form and kill him. Moreover, during these 3 years of time, because the Grand Tao was a backlash that targeted him alone, he was unable to directly obtain the profundities of the golden immortal realm, and he was unable to rely on these 3 years of time to forcefully break through and attain the golden immortal realm. After weighing it clearly, he was not disappointed. With a thought, the radiating will domain quickly shrank back into his body. In the blink of an eye, it shrunk back into his body. The crystal clear will that enveloped his body and revealed an unbreakable will also faded away. Although it did not disappear, it could no longer be seen. After all, it was Luo Fan's will. No matter how strong it was still under his complete control. If he wanted to fade away, he could naturally do so. After the will faded away, Luo Fan's figure returned to his normal appearance. He wore a long robe and had a calm expression on his face. He floated in the void like an ordinary person, and there were no signs of anything unusual. Even so, the power that was constantly shaking the void above his head and condensing did not disappear. Instead, it was still persisting. It was as if all forces, rules, and laws could not delay it at all. Since the main body of the Earth universe had appeared, there was naturally no need for the will that was condensed from the spiritual sense clone to stay. Therefore, it directly twisted and formed a mysterious vortex. It directly gathered the scattered power that was continuously condensing at an extremely fast speed in the void. However, because it was too scattered from the previous bombardment, it still did not condense into a form. Then, it wrapped around the power and sank towards the planet's core below. After experiencing a series of attacks, the power had already lost more than 90% of its power. However, its essence still did not decrease. It was still a power that far exceeded Luo Fan's current cultivation realm. It was even higher than the power that a Khanate Zenith Heaven cultivator possessed. This power could refine the will of Luo Fan's main body in the Earth universe, which was also the will of Luo Fan's Khanate Golden Core Dharma clone to such a degree. Obviously, it had an unimaginable destructive power to will. The will of this spiritual consciousness avatar had already reached the peak of his cultivation realm. Other than directly increasing his cultivation realm, he could only continue to purify and improve with the help of the power's refinement. Hovering in the void, Luo Fan watched the power gradually condense and gradually emit an aura that he was extremely familiar with. His expression was neither happy nor angry, but a certain deep light flashed through his eyes. This person must be above the Khanate Zenith Heaven. Although I used my main body's cultivation realm to cause the backlash of the great Tao and produce countless thunderbolts to repel him, he definitely did not suffer any harm. The essence of this power is stronger than the power that gave birth to the spiritual sense clone. However, it did not naturally condense a spiritual sense. This also proves that the existence is still not dead, but is not easy to use karma to sense it. Never mind, I'll look for that existence to end karma after I get through this tribulation. Such a thought flashed through his mind. For the past 100,000 years, he had been constantly being corroded and destroyed by that power. Even his will have been purified to a level that far exceeded the limits of his cultivation by tens of thousands of times. One could imagine how terrifying the pain he felt was. Therefore, even though he had obtained great benefits from that power, he did not have any thoughts of giving up on investigating what happened in the past. As for why he was sure that the existence was still alive, other than the fact that his counterattack could not really harm the existence that had reached the connate zenith heaven level, the most important judgment was that the power that had been entangled with him for more than 100,000 years did not have a spiritual sense. It was mentioned a long time ago that when one's power reached a certain level in the Earth's universe, such as the connate zenith heaven level, it would naturally be enhanced by the grand Tao, and a spiritual sense would be born from that, causing the power to transform into another form of living being. This living being even possessed a cultivation realm that was extremely close to the connate zenith heaven level, and it could utilize that power to the acme of perfection. It was sufficient to suppress all cultivators below the connate zenith heaven level. Luo Fan's spiritual sense clone had obtained a power that was similar to the connate zenith heaven level, and it was precisely because of this that it could fuse with this planet and make this planet into its body. However, for the past 100,000 years, the power that was entangled with Luo Fan did not have any spiritual sense at all. It merely maintained the inertia from when the power was emitted, and it constantly destroyed Luo Fan's body and disintegrated his will with the intention of wiping him out from this universe. Of course, this was not a contradiction. The fundamental reason for this was that this power had an owner, and the owner of this power clearly did not directly sever the connection between this power and himself. As a result, this power could not be independent. In other words, this power was equivalent to having a spiritual sense, so it naturally did not need the enhancement of the Grand Tao to make it develop a spiritual sense. That was why for the past 100,000 years, this power of such outstanding quality actually could not even produce the most basic spiritual sense. From this, it could also be deduced that the owner of this power, the existence that emitted this power, was still somewhere in this universe, and was still living quite well. If that was not the case, this power would naturally be enhanced by the Grand Tao and become a spiritual sense after losing its owner. After this thought flashed through his mind, Luo Fan directly sat down with his legs crossed. His will, which was already so powerful that it surpassed the limits of his cultivation realm by countless times, surged slightly. 3 feet above his head, an auspicious cloud dragging 3 turbid green lotuses appeared out of thin air. After the auspicious cloud and the AAA appeared, Luo Fan's eyes lit up with countless rays of wisdom. His mind and will kept tracing back. The scene that he had seen when he had condensed the Tao Integration AAA was condensed again by his willpower, which surpassed his limits by tens of thousands of times. It reappeared in his mind and will, making him feel as if he had returned to that moment and was going through the breakthrough again. His mind and will sank into that scene. In a trance, he seemed to see countless mysteries that he had dreamed of. It was as if all the mysteries of the Grand Tao that he needed were within his reach and could be directly obtained by him. If his will was still at the level of 100,000 years, even if he could condense this scene again, he would definitely still be lost in it. In the end, he would only be able to escape when the opportunity for a breakthrough passed. However, because this scene was condensed with the help of his will and was not real, it could not allow him to achieve any breakthrough. It was only equivalent to reliving the feeling of the moment when he broke through, but this was naturally not the case at this moment. At this moment, his will was already tens of thousands of times stronger than before. Even if he spent a large amount of will to condense these scenes again, the remaining will could still allow him to maintain a clear state of mind and wander around in this strange and mysterious state, comprehending the various mysteries within. And when he wandered around in it with a clear state of mind and comprehended the various mysteries within, he finally found out where exactly this place was. Back then, he had not been wrong to think that this was the Great Chaos. This place was indeed the Great Chaos. However, it was not a complete Great Chaos. It was just a side of the Great Chaos that was activated by the innate gold core cultivation method that he cultivated and was compatible with his cultivation method. The various mysteries of the Grand Tao that were displayed were only a part of the mysteries of the Grand Tao that were compatible with his cultivation method. There was still a huge difference between the mysteries of the Grand Tao and the true Great Chaos. If he wanted to comprehend the true Great Chaos through this place and truly be able to move freely in the Great Chaos, it was still just a fantasy and absolutely impossible. Understanding this, although Luo Fan had expected this, he was still a little disappointed. Fortunately, his will was already earth-shattering. This disappointment only flashed in his mind for a moment, and it almost disappeared without a trace, as if it had never appeared. Next, he carefully observed and comprehended the various mysteries of the Grand Tao, and the various truths of the universe contained in it. He constantly corroborated them with the various things that he had comprehended, causing his cultivation realm to constantly improve. After an unknown period of time, it seemed like only a moment had passed, but it also seemed like billions of years had passed. Luo Fan suddenly came to a sudden realization, and he finally comprehended a certain critical juncture. His mind suddenly surged with indescribable joy, and a feeling of great freedom arose from his heart. So that's how it is. So it's so simple. Luo Fan slowly opened his eyes and murmured. As he spoke, in the depths of his body, in a mysterious space that was deeper than the void and vaster than the universe, 5 streams of qi suddenly broke through countless barriers and rushed out of the extremely deep, mysterious space. They directly rushed out of the top of his head and instantly rushed into the auspicious cloud that was a meter above his head. When the 5 streams of qi collided with the auspicious cloud, they instantly collapsed and turned into powder and dust that was thousands of times finer than any number in the world could describe. Before they scattered in all directions, they directly shrank and rushed into the 5 streams of qi. They were directly swallowed by the 5 streams of qi. After the 5 streams of qi engulfed the auspicious cloud, they suddenly expanded from the originally finger-sized streams of qi to a radius of several dozen feet. Like 5 pillars of qi, they shot into the sky and passed through Tao Integration Stage 3A. They collided hundreds of miles above Tao Integration Stage 3A and gradually merged to form a vortex that continuously sucked in the 5 pillars of qi. The 5 pillars of qi continuously merged into the vortex, causing the vortex to become larger and larger, more and more condensed, and more mysterious. The vortex's sucking of the pillars of qi was shockingly powerful. It was as if even 5 oceans could be sucked dry in an instant. However, the 5 pillars of qi were equally mysterious. Although they were being sucked by the vortex, they continuously rushed out of the mysterious space in the depths of Luo Fan's body and merged into the vortex. It was as if there were billions of oceans in it, and no matter how much they were sucked, they did not decrease in the slightest. Just like that, the sucking process continued, and the vortex continued to grow. Not long after, it had grown to an area of 10 acres. After a few days, it had grown to a radius of 10,000 miles. It covered the sky and covered the earth, as if the entire void of the universe had been broken. At that moment, Luo Fan's expression was calm. All kinds of mysterious brilliance flashed through his eyes, as if his body and mind had entered some kind of indescribable, profound realm. He seemed to be completely unaware of all the changes in the outside world. Although he could see them, None of them could pass through his mind. In the blink of an eye, 9 days and 9 nights passed. The vortex had already grown to a radius of 100,000 kilometers. It was so vast that it completely covered the land within 100,000 kilometers, causing the land within 100,000 kilometers to turn pitch black, as if it had entered a polar night. The density of the pillars of chi in the center of such a huge vortex had increased to an unimaginable degree. Finally, at a certain moment, it broke through its shackles and surpassed its limits. A fist-sized existence that could not be described with words suddenly appeared in the center of the vortex. After this existence was formed, the vortex that covered a radius of 100,000 miles suddenly trembled and was sucked dry in an instant. Even the 5 pillars of chi that seemed like they could last for billions of years were completely extracted from the depths of Luo Fan's body in an instant. They were directly thrown into the existence and disappeared without a trace. In the blink of an eye, only a meter-wide existence was left in the void, appearing 50 miles above Luo Fan's head. The existence rotated in the void and slowly descended. It seemed to be very slow, but in the blink of an eye, it had already arrived above Luo Fan's head. With a tremble, it turned into a mysterious 5-layered halo of light that wrapped around the AAA and landed behind Luo Fan's head. Chapter 628. Novel Type. Novel Type. Chapter 668. Refining Equipment, Refinement. The convergence of 3 essences and 5 chi's unification was a realm above the natural leakless golden core. Although the two were separated into 2 steps, and it took Luo Fan hundreds of millions of years to complete these 2 steps, in fact, the combination of the 3 chi gathering at the top and the 5 chi's gathering at the top could be considered a complete realm. The 5 streams of air that had charged out from the depths of Luo Fan's body earlier were the 5 strands of golden Luo chi. The 5 strands of golden Luo chi dispersed the auspicious clouds and transformed into 5 pillars of air that charged into the sky. They weaved together high up in the sky, 50 kilometers above Luo Fan, and the vortex they formed was the predecessor of the Genesis. In the end, the fist-sized existence that was formed at the center of the vortex was the Genesis. The entire process of the 5 streams of air charging out from within his body until they formed the fist-sized existence was the process of the convergence of 5 chis. The Genesis was an extremely profound and mysterious existence. Without truly forming the Genesis, even Luo Fan couldn't know exactly what it was or what profundities it possessed. However, to Luo Fan, who had already completed the process of forming the Genesis was no longer a secret to him, and he easily knew exactly what it was. The Genesis was the predecessor of the golden Luo Chi, the embryonic form of the grand Luo Chi. The convergence of 5 chis meant to weave together the 5 strands of golden Luo Chi and fuse the fragments of the profundities of the grand Luo Chi within them. In the end, it formed the predecessor of the grand Luo Chi, the embryonic form of the grand Luo Chi. The reason why the 5 strands of golden Luo Chi could only weave together the embryonic form of the grand Luo Chi and the Genesis before the grand Luo Chi could not form the true grand Luo was because the profundities of the grand Luo Chi were boundless and boundless. Although the 5 strands of golden Luo Chi contained fragments of the profundities of the grand Luo Chi, they were only an extremely small portion. When they were fused together, they were still extremely far away from the true profundities of the grand Luo Chi. It was already extremely difficult for them to form a Genesis. In fact, only cultivators who cultivated the connate golden core dermic art could fuse the 5 streams of zenith heaven chi into essence the moment they appeared. If a cultivator didn't cultivate the connate golden core and only cultivated the postnatal golden core, such as Lier, even if he cultivated 5 strands of zenith heaven chi, he would need a long time to polish, refine, and cultivate. Only then would he be able to grow enough of the zenith heaven's mysteries to form this origin. In Luo Fan's opinion, once the origin had taken form, his future path of cultivation would be to constantly strengthen the origin and allow it to grow ceaselessly. In the end, it would undergo a complete qualitative change and become a golden immortal. When he completed this step, Luo Fan would break through and become a first heaven golden immortal. Understanding the path he had to take next, Luo Fan's face gradually revealed a smile. He floated in the air, the 5 halos behind his head moving in a mysterious and subtle way. As they moved, strands of the mysteries of the zenith heaven seeped out from them, and a form of perfection spread out and enveloped the space around him. Within the ring of light, the 3 green lotuses with a chaotic luster seemed to be floating, and the profoundness they exuded was even more obvious. However, they seemed to have fused with the ring of light, and the aura they exuded seemed to gradually fuse with the ring of light around them, as if they were weaving together into one. During the process of Luo Fan's 5 Chi's unification, the extremely terrifying energy that was condensing above his head didn't stop for a moment, but it didn't speed up as well. It was as if Luo Fan's 5 Chi's unification didn't make any difference to it at all. After calculating for a while, Luo Fan noticed that it had already been half a year since he started trying to achieve the 5 Chi's unification. At most, it would take another 2.5 years for the terrifying energy above his head to truly condense into form. After knowing the time, Luo Fan already knew what he had to do. After coming to Earth, Luo Fan hadn't encountered many battles, but most of them were against existences whose strength or cultivation far surpassed his own. This allowed him to comprehend many principles that he couldn't comprehend with his current level of cultivation, but it was also an extremely dangerous experience. And this dangerous experience also allowed Luo Fan to discover his greatest weakness, which was that he didn't have any magic tools at all. Whether it was against cultivators whose cultivation realm was far lower than his, or against supreme existences whose cultivation realm was tens of thousands of times higher than his, he could only face them empty-handed. He could only rely on his own divine ability to face them. Magic treasures were extremely important to cultivators, and for ordinary cultivators, they could be said to be the basis of their entire strength. It could be said that if an ordinary cultivator didn't have a magic treasure, they would find it difficult to use their own cultivation. Their strength would be at least 100 or even 1,000 times weaker than when they had magic treasures. Luo Fan wasn't an ordinary cultivator. He himself was already able to completely bring forth his own cultivation, and every single move he made carried supreme might and boundless divine abilities. He was practically omnipotent. It was precisely because of this that Luo Fan neglected the use of magic treasures. After coming to Earth for such a long time, he actually didn't think of refining a magic treasure to use. This was also a habit brought about by the Untainted World. In Untainted World, although Luo Fan had several magic treasures, he was still used to using his own strength when fighting against enemies. With his cultivation level, he could almost use his own strength in Untainted World, which naturally encouraged him to think that he didn't need magic treasures. However, after coming to Earth and encountering these few battles, he finally understood that although Earth had already entered the age of Dharma ending, because of the endless time it had existed, it had a foundation that far surpassed Untainted World. In Untainted World, he could be said to be an innate god that could suppress heaven and earth, and even be respected as a town master by all living beings in the world. However, in Earth, he was nothing, not to mention the 7 great sages who would appear in the future 6 billion years in the future. The Supreme Buddha, who was inextricably linked to the Earth's universe, but was actually outside the Earth's universe. Even Yin Kong and the Palm he encountered more than 100,000 years ago were not people he could compare with. Under such circumstances, with his own strength, it was slightly insufficient to even protect himself, let alone suppress everything like Untainted World. Because of this, to Luo Fan, if he really wanted to have a strong enough ability to survive in Earth, he needed magic treasures, or even magic treasures to increase his strength. After completing the 5 Chi's unification, the world in Luo Fan's eyes had new changes compared to the past. He could directly go deep into the source of everything he saw, directly see the mysterious rules hidden behind those things, and easily see the truth that needed to be carefully comprehended in the past. Therefore, after he used the unification of 5 Qis, he was able to see through his flaws with just a thought. He knew that it was time for him to refine a magic treasure. With a slight thought, Luo Fan took a step forward, and his figure instantly crossed the planet, directly arriving at the meteorite belt next to the star. The whole process of him stepping out of the planet and crossing the void was like moving clouds and flowing water, without the slightest fluctuation of space. It was like an ordinary person crossing the threshold of space to arrive outside of space. It was impossible to tell that, during the process, he had crossed a distance that could be calculated with the speed of light. Compared to before he had the 5 Qis unification, it was much easier and more mysterious. After arriving at the meteorite belt, Luo Fan did not hesitate. With a slight thought, the will that was originally hidden in his body trembled and reappeared. Luo Fan, who was in the meteorite belt, instantly turned into a crystal-clear sculpture that seemed to be constructed from countless particles that were many times stronger than diamonds. In that instant, the void within a range of several 100 million kilometers around his body gave off a feeling that it was completely under his control. This area was so vast that it enveloped 1/3 of the meteorite belt. This caused the meteorites orbiting the central star in the meteorite belt to unknowingly change their trajectories. They gradually deviated from their original trajectories, as if they had been frozen by a force. The light of wisdom flickered wildly in Luo Fan's eyes. The appearance of the entire meteorite belt had completely changed in his eyes. The meteorites that had originally been there had completely disappeared, and in their place were lumps of light that were formed from strange rules. These rules were like countless threads. Not only did they condense into a ball, but they were also interconnected with each other. They were even vaguely connected to an overwhelming ball of light in the distance, as if they were resonating with each other. These clusters of light, constructed from strands of laws, were the origin of the envoys, and the massive cluster of light in the distance was naturally the central star of this galaxy. Carefully distinguishing the clumps of light formed by these strands of laws, Luo Fan occasionally had a thought. He raised his hand and grabbed one of the clumps of light, pulling it to his side. In just a few days, his surroundings were filled with 12,960 lumps of light. These lumps of light were only what Luo Fan could see. In fact, these lumps of light were actually the same as the appearance of 12,960 lumps of light around the meteorites. This meant that there were 12,960 meteorites around him. These meteorites were of different sizes. The big ones were even as big as the moon, while the small ones were at most a few dozen feet in radius. They were of completely different sizes, but when they were arranged, there was no irregularity at all. Instead, they emitted a mysterious aura, as if they had formed an incomparably mysterious and complete whole. It was as if they could faintly connect with the great Tao in the dark. These meteorites were of different sizes, but the actual difference in size was not the same as the size of their light source. Some meteorites were incomparably huge, but the light they represented was only the size of a fist. Some meteorites were only a few dozen feet in radius, but the light they represented was incomparably huge, as big as the moon. The difference between them was extremely mysterious, and it contained some kind of indescribable mystery. The meteorites in this meteorite belt were extremely large. The loss of 12,960 meteorites was not a big deal to the entire meteorite belt. However, the hole formed by the 12,960 meteorites was like an isolated island on a river. Instead, it caused the flow of the meteorite belt to change drastically. It could no longer flow as smoothly as before, and it caused an extremely violent reaction. Countless meteorites collided with the 12,960 meteorites, crumbled, scattered, collided again, crumbled again, scattered again. The cycle repeated itself, almost never stopping. Luo Fan did not care about this at all. He raised his head and looked at the void above him. He saw that the terrifying aura was constantly condensing, and the power that was preparing to strike him was growing and condensing at every moment. It was no different from when it was on the planet. It was as if it had appeared in this place since the beginning. As expected, it moves with me. Such a thought flashed across Luo Fan's mind. After this thought, he no longer cared about the power that was condensing above his head. He took a light step forward, and his figure, along with the 12,960 meteorites around him, directly crossed the void and appeared on the side of the meteorite belt that was closer to the star. The entire process was still as smooth as flowing water. It was no different from when Luo Fan crossed the void from the planet's surface to the meteorite belt. It was as if the 12,960 envoys did not exist at all. After losing the 12,960 meteorites, the meteorite belt trembled slightly before returning to its calm state. It was as smooth as before, as if nothing had happened. The 12,960 envoys were only an insignificant part of the meteorite belt. The reason why the meteorites in the meteorite belt kept attacking them was because the way they were arranged was completely out of the meteorite belt. They were equivalent to huge foreign objects in the meteorite belt, so they naturally caused the meteorite belt to attack them. Their departure was equivalent to the foreign objects being pushed away, and the meteorite belt naturally returned to its calm state. After arriving outside the meteorite belt, Luo Fan raised his hand and made a grabbing motion. The origin light of the meteorites trembled slightly, and countless law threads instantly shot out. As these threads shot out, the 12,960 meteorites began to shake violently. In the process of this shaking, countless meteorite fragments scattered from these meteorites, as if all the meteorites were collapsing in some strange way. Luo Fan shot out more and more threads of law, and the tremors of those meteorites became more and more intense. More and more meteorite fragments were scattered from them. After these fragments broke away from the meteorites, they were naturally pushed out of the 12,960 meteorites and dispersed in the void. In the end, they either turned into stardust, were attracted to the star in the center, or were wrapped by the meteorite belt and attached to the meteorites. However, Luo Fan didn't care about these meteorite fragments at this time. He continuously weaved the law threads he took out from the meteorites in a mysterious way in front of him, gradually forming 12,960 light balls that were countless times smaller than the previous light balls, but were many times more condensed. These balls of light were so condensed that they had even condensed to the point of becoming solid, as if they were crystals. The original light balls were too big, so time gradually passed as the law threads were reconstructed. In the blink of an eye, a year had passed. In total, there was only a year and a half left before the terrifying power that emitted a terrifying aura would truly condense and deal a devastating blow to Luo Fan. At this moment, the 12,960 meteorites outside the meteorite belt had already completely disappeared. They had turned into countless meteorite fragments that scattered in all directions and could no longer be seen. In front of Luo Fan, who was floating in the middle, there were 12,960 strange crystal stones. These crystals came in different sizes, but the bigger ones were no bigger than a fist, while the smaller ones were no smaller than a thumb. These crystals were extremely mysterious, as if they were the toughest matter in the universe. Even if the universe was destroyed, they wouldn't be damaged at all. However, they also seemed like illusory shadows that would occasionally distort slightly, making them seem rather illusory. These crystals were none other than the objects formed by the law threads that Luo Fan had reconstructed. The law threads had been reconstructed from the meteorite's origin, so it was naturally impossible to completely replicate the structure of the meteorite's origin. In fact, the construction method of the law threads to form these crystals was extremely mysterious. Not only did it contain the various unfathomable powers of the meteorite's origin, but Luo Fan had also added countless of his own understandings and engraved countless mysterious runes on them. He had also added countless mysteries of the great Tao that he had comprehended, so the essence of the crystals had been enhanced by thousands of times. Runes were the carriers of information that were most compatible with the mysteries of the great Tao in this universe. Hence, the most efficient way to refine magic tools and set up formations in this universe was to use runes. Hence, the runes on these crystals were not, because Luo Fan had deliberately not used his other methods, such as formation patterns or three-dimensional talismans. Instead, it was because only by using these runes would he be able to raise the efficiency to the highest, allowing the power of the magic tools that he was about to refine to the greatest. These crystals formed an extremely mysterious arrangement in the void. This arrangement was similar to an extremely simple rune, but it also seemed like an indescribably exquisite formation. It was more like an indescribable trace of the Tao. They were not stationary in the void. Instead, they were vibrating slightly in a strange way, and there seemed to be some kind of strange connection between them. It was as if the 12,960 crystals were only a small part of the entire crystal. Luo Fan stood in the void and gently waved his hand. The 12,960 crystals began to move rapidly and collide with each other, producing strange sounds of collision. After a few breaths, they had collided and assembled together, directly forming a spherical crystal in front of him. This spherical crystal was complete and flawless. It was impossible to tell that it was constructed from 12,960 crystals. Instead, it seemed to be naturally perfect, without the slightest crack or deviation. Chapter 629. Tribulation. Under this strange phenomenon, the void within a radius of 10 million kilometers seemed to have completely separated from the Earth's universe. Instead, it was completely assimilated by the spherical crystal, becoming a part of it. Luo Fan raised his hand and waved, and the crystal fell into his hand. The entire crystal was the size of a human head. It was crystal clear and extremely mysterious. There were faint specks of light shining inside, as if they were swimming in some strange pattern. Luo Fan looked at the crystal, and a faint smile appeared on his face. This crystal was none other than a magic tool that he had refined with the help of the 12,960 meteorites over the past year or so. This magic tool didn't have any restrictions inside, but it wasn't like those crude artifacts that didn't even have restrictions. It was because it was crude. It was because the internal structure of this magic tool was directly based on the laws and reached the essence of its existence. The moment it was formed, it was directly connected to the great Tao. When it was used, it could naturally borrow the power of the great Tao, and it possessed supreme power. Under such circumstances, there was naturally no need for any restrictions to display its power. The reason why restrictions were so important to magic tools was because they were the reason why magic tools were extraordinary. They were also the fundamental power of magic tools. For ordinary magic tools, their power was determined by the restrictions contained inside. The type of the restrictions determined the power of the magic tool, and the number of restrictions determined the power of the magic tool. However, for a magic tool that could directly communicate with the great Tao without any restrictions and possess supreme power, restrictions were naturally not necessary. Luo Fan carefully sensed it, and all the functions of this magic tool appeared in his mind in an instant. After understanding its power, a satisfied smile appeared on his face. He was a little more confident about whether he could survive the great calamity in a year and a half. Lifting his head to look at the sky, he could see that the terrifying aura was still gathering above his head. Compared to a year and a half ago, this energy was much stronger, and the terrifying aura that covered the sky was several times stronger than before. At this moment, under this power, Luo Fan faintly felt his heart palpitate, as if an indescribable danger was approaching him step by step. Feeling the terror of this power, Luo Fan sighed. The confidence that he had just gained was suppressed a little. He sat cross-legged in the air, and with a thought, he summoned the magic tool he had just forged. It floated 3 feet in front of him, level with his eyes. Following that, his body flickered with golden radiance. The 5 halos behind his head trembled slightly, and the 3 halos within them began to mysteriously open and close. Every time the 5 halos flickered, bits of light would leave the halos and float towards the magic tool. Every time the 3 halos within the halos opened and closed, flower petals would fall from them, penetrate the halos, and float towards the magic tool. The golden radiance shining from his body was overwhelming, and it directly enveloped the magic tool. The bits of light, along with the flower petals and endless golden radiance, constantly poured into the magic tool. With the influx of all kinds of strange existences, the crystal ball-like magic tool began to produce all kinds of inexplicable changes. Strange threads began to appear out of thin air inside and on the surface of the magic tool, and began to swim and shuttle in some mysterious way that could not be described with words. As these threads swam and shuttled, the bits of light inside the magic tool began to interact with the light from the outside, the flower petals, and the golden radiance. This interaction caused the mysterious aura that the magic tool exuded to constantly grow. At the same time, the tens of millions of miles of the void that the magic tool naturally affected began to shrink at a speed visible to the naked eye. However, although the scope of its influence was shrinking, the strength of its influence was constantly increasing. If it was said that the void within a radius of tens of millions of miles had become independent and existed outside of the Earth's universe, after it shrank, it was as if the void within the area affected by the artifact was giving birth to another universe, giving birth to other infinite stars that were different from the Earth's universe. During this process, the power that emitted a terrifying aura seemed to be slowly dispersing from its original focus on Luo Fan's body, and gradually dispersed to the vast area of the void around Luo Fan that was affected by the magic tool. It was as if, in the eyes of that power, the void had gradually become a part of Luo Fan's body. This change continued without end. After a year and a half, the void affected by the magic tool had shrunk to only an acre of land around his body. Although it was still very large compared to his body, it had shrunk hundreds of millions of times compared to the void with a radius of tens of millions of miles. At this moment, the power that was emitting a terrifying aura had completely shifted its focus on Luo Fan to the surrounding space of an acre. Its focus on Luo Fan was only equivalent to locking onto any part of the space within an acre of an acre. Obviously, after a year and a half of sacrificial refinement, Luo Fan had completely fused the surrounding void of an acre with the magic tool. And at the same time, he had completely fused the magic tool with himself. At this moment, this magic tool was equivalent to a part of his body, a part of his soul, and even a part of his leakless golden core. After a year and a half of sacrificial refinement, the crystal ball-like magic tool had also undergone an inexplicable change. The entire crystal ball wasn't translucent and crystalline any longer, and it had become bright golden instead. Moreover, it emanated an aura that was flawless, immortal, and invulnerable. It was like a natural leakless golden core that was the size of a human head. The void of an acre around Luo Fan's body had already become an incomparably complete world, but it seemed illusory and unreal. This world was also a void, just like the void of the Earth's universe. However, there were tiny specks of light in this void. Some of these specks of light were extremely scattered, while some were gathered in one place, forming a special whole according to some special method. If one were to carefully distinguish their distribution, it would be almost exactly the same as the distribution of galaxies and stellar systems in the Earth's universe. If these specks of light were to be magnified hundreds of millions of times, one would be able to easily see that these specks of light were actually stars. Even around the stars, there were planets that were as small as dust. Obviously, the void of an acre around Luo Fan's body had been turned into another universe similar to the Earth's universe by the mysterious function of the magic tool. Of course, although this universe was already quite large, it was only formed by a magic tool after all. There might be countless shadows of living beings in it, but it was still impossible for real living beings to exist. It was still too difficult for the current Luo Fan to give birth to real living beings in this universe and truly turn it into a complete universe. At the very least, he would have to wait for this magic tool to truly become a magic treasure before there was even a trace of a possibility. In fact, Luo Fan boldly guessed that even if it was upgraded to a magic treasure, it would not be possible for it to be an immortal treasure. At the very least, it would have to be upgraded to a Tai profound treasure to barely be able to do it. Luo Fan opened his eyes and quietly looked at this magic tool that was like a connate leakless gold core. He carefully felt the feeling that was transmitted from it, as if it was his own hands and feet, and he was quite satisfied in his heart. When this magic tool had just been successfully refined, it had already surged a lot to him, but it was only now that it could be regarded as something that he could rely on to pass the tribulation. Although this magic tool was quite useful and could be considered his magic tool, he couldn't control it perfectly because it didn't have any spiritual consciousness. He couldn't really condense its own power either. Although it was useful to him, it wouldn't be very effective against the upcoming tribulation. Only at this moment did he completely fuse this magic artifact with his body and mind, allowing this magic artifact to truly become a part of his body and mind. He allowed his body and mind to enter the magic artifact and completely control even the slightest changes in the magic artifact. In this way, he would be able to condense the magic artifact's functions and allow the magic artifact's might to be completely brought forth. Only then would he be able to truly rely on it to deal with the upcoming tribulations. After carefully sensing it, just as Luo Fan was about to stand up, he suddenly felt an indescribable terror descend from the sky and invade his heart in an instant. It made him feel as if his entire mind and mind were suddenly thrown into the 18 layers of hell, as if there were hundreds of millions of existences in the void that could tear him into pieces, sharpening their knives and staring at him. With the invasion of this terror, Luo Fan instantly understood. The tribulation had arrived. He used his own tenacity to break through the limit and even triggered the great tribulation to escape from that terror. He looked up, his eyes penetrating the universe formed by the magic tool, and saw the power that had been condensed for 3 years and was emitting a terrifying aura. Sure enough, the power that had been condensed for 3 years had condensed and formed in that instant. The terrifying aura that it exuded had skyrocketed tens of thousands of times because of its formation. It covered the sky and covered the earth, covering the void of an acre around Luo Fan's body. It was precisely because the terrifying aura had suddenly increased to such an extent that when the void of an acre had been split up to bear it together, it still made Luo Fan feel that kind of feeling. Luo Fan looked at the power and slowly stood up. He raised his hand and pointed at the magic tool that was like a natural leakless gold core. The magic tool emitted endless golden light that directly connected to every light spot in this 1 acre universe, which was to say, to every star. As the golden light connected, the entire 1 acre universe shook slightly, and its strength instantly increased by tens of thousands of times. The entire universe became an incomparably complete entity at this moment, as if it had become a strange creature. The power that emitted the terrifying aura was like a strange planet. The way it appeared was as if it was slowly squeezed into this universe from an inexplicable place. Slowly, bit by bit, it appeared from the void. As it appeared, the terrifying aura skyrocketed at an unimaginable speed. This aura was so strong that it caused countless fine cracks to appear in the void within a radius of hundreds of millions of miles. Then, it gradually began to collapse, turning into countless spatial fragments. The radius of hundreds of millions of miles was nothing compared to the void of the universe. The greatest impact was only on the surrounding asteroid belts. It did not even affect the sun in the center, nor the planet that Luo Fan's spiritual sense doppelganger had refined behind the asteroid belts. Light traveled 300,000 kilometers in a second, and hundreds of millions of miles were only a few hundred seconds for light. The distance between this asteroid belt and the central star would take light tens of minutes to travel. Although it was not that far from the planet that Luo Fan's spiritual sense doppelganger had refined, it would still take a few minutes to reach it. Such a long distance obviously could not be affected by the terrifying aura produced by the planet's squeezing into the void. The asteroid belt was affected by this aura, and the asteroids within it continued to collapse at an unimaginable speed. The entire asteroid belt was cut off by the terrifying aura in an instant. The asteroids that were enveloped by the terrifying aura completely collapsed in an instant, turning into stardust. However, the stardust did not scatter in all directions, but was directly swallowed up by the countless cracks created by the collapse of the void. In the end, it disappeared without a trace, as if it had never been there. The asteroid belt did not stop moving because of this change. Instead, there were still asteroids falling into this region from behind, and they were constantly being destroyed, swallowed, and finally disappeared. However, although the asteroids were moving at a fast speed, it was still on the grand scale of the universe after all. In a short period of time, it was impossible for too many asteroids to fall into this region. Therefore, in the process of the terrifying aura constantly squeezing into the void, only a few dozen asteroids falling into the region from outside were destroyed and swallowed. As the celestial force continued to squeeze into the void, the terrifying aura grew stronger and stronger. The pressure on the surrounding void became more and more astonishing, and the void was naturally stirred more and more violently. The void within a radius of hundreds of millions of miles also became more and more chaotic. Previously, it was only the void that was collapsing because of the cracks. When the celestial body completely appeared, the void within a radius of hundreds of millions of miles had completely turned into a paste. Even time seemed to have been completely minced and fused with the minced space, matter, yuan qi, power, and various other existences. However, this kind of fusion was not a state of chaos, but an extremely serious state of chaos. This state possessed unfathomable destructive power, but it was impossible for a cultivator to comprehend the mysteries of chaos, and it was even more impossible for a cultivator to evolve a universe within it. It only possessed destruction and destruction. Right in the middle of this incomparably chaotic state, below the celestial body, was a cosmos with a circumference of an acre. Like an indestructible reef, no matter how the chaotic state struck, it did not waver, nor was it damaged in the slightest. Luo Fan was currently sitting cross-legged in the center of this universe. He raised his head, and his gaze pierced through the universe, looking directly at the celestial body and observing every trace of change on it. In front of him, the artifact that resembled an innate leakless golden core was emitting boundless golden light, connecting every star in this universe, and gathering all the energy to stabilize this universe. No matter how the chaotic state of chaos struck it, it did not waver or retreat in the slightest. Luo Fan gazed at the celestial body, his eyes flashing with boundless wisdom. The mystical perspective brought about by his mastery of the five Qis unification allowed him to directly see through the origin of this celestial body. The essence of this celestial body was just a solid object that was as black as ink. This solid object was not a physical existence, but the condensation of boundless laws, and boundless mysteries. Its essence was the materialization of a certain power that surpassed the limits. The terrifying aura that completely shattered the space within a radius of hundreds of millions of miles and formed a state of chaos that could devour and destroy everything was emitted by this inky black object. Such a huge celestial body was just another manifestation of this force in the Earth universe. Just as Luo Fan was carefully analyzing the essence of the celestial body, the celestial body had completely squeezed into the void and completely appeared in the void of the Earth's universe. At the same time, it caused the environment within a radius of hundreds of millions of miles to become even more chaotic and even emitted some chaotic aura. After the celestial body completely appeared, it trembled and slowly pressed down towards the cosmos that was the size of an acre below it. In the process of pressing down, that terrifying aura gradually concentrated on this cosmos, causing the range of chaos to gradually shrink instead. Although the chaos that escaped from the scope of the terrifying aura did not directly restore order, it gradually began to change. Time and space were the first to transform into order. This caused that when the celestial body began to press down, that glue-like state began to gradually change in color from the outermost layer. The deeper inside, the darker the color, and the lighter the color. The celestial body was originally a few hundred miles away from Luo Fan. When Luo Fan gradually formed the cosmos that was the size of an acre, the distance also gradually increased. When finally stabilized, it was already more than 5,000 miles away. Compared to the celestial body that had a diameter of 10,000 miles, what kind of distance was that? In just a few dozen breaths, it was directly crushed by the celestial body. When the celestial body was about to come into contact with the cosmos that was the size of an acre, that terrifying aura that shook the heavens and the earth had already completely condensed above the cosmos. The terrifying aura that was originally scattered over a radius of hundreds of millions of miles had converged to the size of an acre. One could imagine how many times its strength had increased.